Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 361. Mimir. Thor turned around completely. Blue eyes, a burly build, and even Mjolnir grasped in one hand. It was the spitting image of Thor, the Thunderer of Asgard, widely known among people. If there was one difference, it was only in the eyes. Why do you think so? The voice was also perfectly the same. Anyone who knew Thor, or didn't know him, probably wouldn't be able to help but be fooled looking at such an appearance. That wasn't a simple disguise. Yuan was certain that what he was seeing wasn't real. Flash. Fire-eyed golden pupil, resists the false illusion. Fire-eyed golden pupil, reveals the truth. Fire-eyed golden pupil. Eyes that pierced through falsehoods and saw the truth. As the skill activated, the form of Thor before Yuan's eyes began to distort slightly. Flicker, flicker. Familiar old man's face began to appear over Thor's face that was changing with all sorts of faces. Is that the fire-eyed golden pupil? The voice sounded changed. The fire-eyed golden pupil was gradually dismantling the opponent's skill. It's my first time seeing it in person. Roar. Fire-eyed golden pupil sees through Mimir's deception. Mimir's deception is dismantled. The scenery before Yuan's eyes changed. The dusty walls and window frames of the old annex, the bed, and the side table next to it. Everything disappeared without a trace, and a completely different scenery entered his sight. It was the interior of a damp and humid cave. Since when had he been trapped in this illusion? Since I met Hargan, or since the garden? One thing was for sure, the time wasn't short. It was still difficult for Yuan to see through this illusion without the fire-eyed golden pupil. Nice to meet you. The burly Thor disappeared, and an old man who was about a head shorter than Yuan appeared before Yuan. With a crooked back and wrinkled face. Looking at his outward appearance or the aura he gave off, he felt like a small being incomparable to Thor. However, it's really Mimir. He didn't know about other rankers, but Yuan knew clearly just how monstrous of a being this old man who appeared before his eyes was. Mimir. His rank was barely in the triple digits, but that was only because of his characteristic. Did he wake up? The period he could be active was only 1 year out of 100 years. He was cursed with the curse of knowledge and had to spend most of his life asleep to endure the overload of his brain despite his great abilities. He was a powerless being who could do nothing by himself for most of his life. That was why the Rank Management Bureau measured Mimir's rank as 999th, the last place among the triple digits. But in other words, it meant that even in that situation where he slept most of his life and could die anytime at the hands of anyone, Mimir maintained that rank. I thought it was about time to wake up. You speak as if you waited for me. That's right, I was waiting. Mimir's eyes bent into a crescent shape at Yuan's reply. It was a delighted face. To him, who knew everything in the world enough to be called a curse, Yuan was one of the few beings who stimulated his curiosity. It seems like it's going to be a long story. Thud, thud, thud. As Mimir's magic moved, 2 rocks rose between Yuan and Mimir. 2 simple chairs that were easily made. Sit down. You must have sore legs from fighting so hard, so don't stand. It seemed like Mimir knew that Yuan had come from training with Athena. Sitting on the chair Mimir had created, Yuan looked into his eyes. Those eyes are still the same. The eyes that saw everything in the tower. It was impossible to lie in front of Mimir. You must have known me there too. Didn't Odin tell you about the clock tower? Yeah, he did. He also told me that you returned because you were chosen by the clock tower that I created. Of course, Mimir knew everything and came to find him. Then, the story would be a lot easier. You and Odin planned and started creating the clock tower, but someone else completed it. Yuan skipped the introduction and went straight to the main point. Anyone else would have had a conversation to get to know each other a little bit, but that was how it had to be for Mimir. Because he didn't have time. Wasting time on hypocrisy and useless courtesy was the rudest thing to do to Mimir. You might remember him, don't you? It was a question, but Yuan's voice was full of conviction. If it was Mimir, who first conceptualized the existence of the clock tower with Odin and contributed the most to its creation, would be able to resist the power of the clock tower. As expected, there are 3 of us, including me. Mimir didn't deny Yuan's words. Kronos, I remember that guy. Yuan's eyes flashed. Kronos. As expected, Mimir remembered that name. The name that even Zeus or Hades, who were related by blood, couldn't remember. 1 is me, 2 is you, and the last one is Pyeongtak Seong, that guy. Pyeongtak Seong Uma Wong, Sun Wukong's sworn brother, he was the best warlock in this tower. Through his knowledge that was similar to but different from magic, Uma Wong was able to identify the distortion of this world that was intervened by the clock tower. Uma Wong, who confirmed the existence of Kronos that way. And now, Mimir and Yuan in front of him. With this, the number of people who remembered the name that no one remembered became 3. Odin couldn't remember that guy. That guy might be the best in magic, but he sucks at things like witchcraft. So, did you think I would remember him? You're quick-witted. Mimir, who seemed to be chuckling, slapped his knee. I wanted to meet Pyeongtak Seong too, but I couldn't find him. Where the hell did he go? It seemed that Mimir also knew that Sun Wukong had come to the past through the clock tower, just like Yuan. Mimir was trapped in the curse of knowledge because he had a stronger desire for knowledge than anyone else in this tower. To him, Yuan and Sun Wukong, who were like living witnesses of the clock tower, must have been people he wanted to meet at least once. He went to challenge the next floor. Next floor. Mimir's eyes lit up. The title, Ranker, which was given only to players who had cleared the tower. Among them, Sun Wukong was a high ranker who had one of the best skills in this tower. For such a Sun Wukong, what did the next floor mean? Above the ceiling? Yeah, in the future, did you find the door? The door leading up the tower. Mimir was the first one to find that door. Yuan also came to know about the door through Mimir, and he only informed Zeus and Poseidon about what he had seen and experienced. Naturally, Mimir understood what Yuan meant by next floor right away. It's good that you came from the future. I didn't think it was actually possible. It was thanks to Kronos' sacrifice. Pyeongtak Seong, that guy probably came back because of me. Was he able to see through all of his thoughts? He couldn't help but think, as expected. Yuan reached out his hand. Mimir, I need your head. It felt like it wasn't the first time he had reached out to someone like this and asked them to help him. Yuan had, in most situations, taken the approach of drawing out help from others. But this time, it was different. You already know the future. Then why do you need my help? Because the future is subject to change. This 1 year that Mimir had woken up. Yuan had been waiting for this 1 year. If the past changes, wouldn't the future change as well? That's stating the obvious. Well, it can't be helped. Still, it would be a great harvest if we could just prevent things like the Gigantomachia and Ragnarok. If the past changes, the future changes. That extremely obvious law could not be changed, not even by the existence of the clock tower. Especially if the outer, including the foolish chaos, notices the existence that had traveled back using the clock tower, that change would definitely accelerate. And then, Odin came up with a brilliant idea. Find Mimir. Even at that time, Mimir had been asleep. In order to create this long and distant plan, he had received a curse to sleep for a time that was several times longer than 100 years. That's when Act 2 begins. Act 2. If all the plans up until then had been based on the future that had already been set, from then on, they had to make another plan based on the future that had been changed. Yuan knew all the possibilities of the future. It wasn't difficult since if he knew the incident and the cause, he could know the person and prepare for them. The problem was the future that had changed because the past had been tampered with. And the only one who could know that future and establish a new plan was Mimir. I need to know about the changed future as well. Before coming here, Mimir had come with some rough information about Yuan. The one who ended Ragnarok with Odin. And the one who became a high ranker in the shortest amount of time in history. Just how many people in the tower could accomplish such things simply by knowing the future? Is it greed or is there a reason you must do so? The corners of Mimir's lips, who was looking at Yuan, went up slightly. The latter. Yes. Then I'd like to know the reason. It wasn't difficult to tell him the reason. The broken wall. The crumbling boundary and the existences that had come from outside the tower. The world that had collapsed because of them. It wasn't too difficult to tell him about those things. However, Odin shouldn't know. Yuan was worried about what would happen if Odin found out about all of this. Mimir and Odin were the best of friends. Fortunately, Mimir quickly realized the reason. If that guy finds out, he'll act on his own. Yes. As expected, that was the best thing to say in such a situation. Thanks to that, Yu-won was able to put one of his worries aside. Yu-won's story began. It wasn't a very long story. The tower was destroyed because of the outer, and the remaining colleagues planned to change the past using the clock tower. And now, he was in the middle of carrying out that plan. That was all there was to the story. Outside the tower, the outer, the foreign gods. Stories related to the outside seemed to be enough to pique Mimir's interest. He covered one of his twitching eyes with one hand again. Headaches and eye strain were side effects that occurred when his head was spinning too much. The future has already changed. So I have something to ask you. What is it? Mimir, covering one eye with his hand, asked. It's a bit roundabout, but it ends up going back to what we were talking about earlier. Although he looked quite pained, Yu-won knew that this time, when his head was spinning the fastest, was the best time to ask his question. About Kronos. A face like Zeus, with black hair. And one dot on his face. Is that geezer alive? Perhaps Kronos might still be alive. Yu-won asked, carrying that anticipation. Chapter 362. Are you alive? It was an ambiguous face. Well, I don't know which side. Quote question mark quote. If you are alive, and if you are not, you are not. You don't know which side. Yu-won's expression seemed to be asking what he was talking about, and Mimir still had a complicated face. There is something Mimir doesn't know in this tower. It was when Yu-won was thinking about what it would be like in an unexpected case. Don't tell me, something that even Mimir, who sees everything in the tower, doesn't know. There was only one thing Yu-won knew about it. Is it outside? Outside this tower. Mimir's eyes were not able to fully exert their power only when it came to the existences outside the tower. As expected, he's inside. Mimir's answer to Yu-won's question was affirmative. Inside. It seems that he was banished once. I don't know why or how, but he became a completely different being. Limited information. However, there was no doubt about the certainty of the information. Because the source of the information was Mimir. Then really. Cronus was banished outside. Cronus was no longer a person in this world. Outside this tower. Outer. At that moment, the situation when Zeus met Cronus came to Yu-won's mind. Was it when the foolish chaos opened the door for a moment? If he was banished outside the tower and entered through the gap in the door. It was an understandable situation. There was only one problem. He wouldn't have opened the door himself. How and in what way did he break through the unbreakable wall and go outside? At that moment, when the thought came to mind. I guess we have the same idea. Mimir smiled faintly. Is it because he doesn't remember Cronus so well? He didn't seem to be very sad that Cronus had been banished outside this world. If it was Mimir that Yu-won knew, I would have cried a lot. Maybe only the memories came back. It seemed that the memories he had with Cronus or his camaraderie with him did not return. It seemed that was the limit of the power of Mimir's eyes. Anyway, thanks to that, Yu-won was able to gain one more thing through Mimir's words. Just a little bit, I felt like I had found a clue to outer. Yu-won and Mimir's conversation continued for quite a long time. The story about Cronus was put on hold for now. Talking at length about an unanswered question was a great luxury for Mimir, who didn't have much time anyway. Then, I'll do that with Shiva. There won't be much change on that side. After all. Yu-won talked about the situations he had changed so far. And he reassembled the changes that would occur due to those situations and the changes in the plan that followed. My head was about to explode. Yu-won, who stopped talking for a moment, scratched his head and bent his stiff neck back. After all, this is something you should have come to. If that was the case, there would have been no need to replan as complicatedly as it is now. It seems that I haven't found a way to lift the curse on that side either. Rather, it got worse. Yu-won couldn't bring himself to say that. He knew how long Mimir and Odin had been trying to lift the curse of knowledge. But you can't fool Mimir even if you deceive the heavens. I know, too, it's going to get worse if this keeps up. Quote. Mimir's curse got worse the more he used his knowledge. At first, 50 years out of 100. And 60 years, 70 years. He fell into a deeper and longer sleep. I'll be over 100 next time. I'm sorry. Because of this, Mimir wasted more time than he had ever spent. The side effect of overusing his eyes would be a longer period of sleep and the curse would continue to accelerate. If Odin were to find out, he might go crazy with anger. Alright, it's either this or we all die anyway. Mimir waved his hand as if it were nothing, but it wasn't the case for Wu Jin. The curse of knowledge. Unless he found a way to remove it, Mimir would probably fall into an eternal sleep someday. In a state of neither death nor life. I will definitely remove your curse someday. It was a promise that he wouldn't normally make. Wu Jin usually just thought about these kinds of things and didn't recklessly say them out loud. But Wu Jin still said it. Definitely, and it was like a promise to himself. I would like you to do that. He spoke as if he didn't really expect it. It seemed like he was already prepared to sacrifice his time. Even if the price was eternal sleep. In the end, Mimir seemed to have chosen to make the plans that he and his other colleagues had made for the future more solid. Then let's stop talking about it here. His eyes must have been hurting quite a bit because Mimir screwed his eyes shut and pressed his ring finger and index finger on his eyelids. And then, the next moment, swish, swish, Mimir's illusion begins. Wan Jiamjung resists Mimir's illusion. Does not resist Mimir's illusion. A new illusion began, and the world that Wu Jin saw through his pupils started to change again. Back to its original appearance. Before he knew it, Wu Jin was inside a small annex with Mimir, who was in the form of Thor. You must have waited a long time. That guy too. Mimir's gaze was outside the annex. It went towards Heracles, who was standing still with Halgan. Almost half a day had passed. He had really waited for a long time. What are you going to do now? Wu Jin thought for a moment at Mimir's question. In the first place, Wu Jin hadn't thought that he would meet him like this. Originally, he should have moved according to the new plan that was made. However, let's go there first, to Asgard. Wu Jin changed direction for a moment. When he met Mimir, there originally wouldn't have been a reason to go to Asgard. But there was a problem. Since we have to deal with Kronos first. Whether it was Kronos or not, that wasn't the biggest problem. Perhaps the more important issue was that letting him into the tower was a foolish act of chaos. Why did he have to let Kronos in? Was it really a coincidence? No, there's no way that's true. The number of outer gods was countless. The fact that Kronos came through the door among them meant that he would be used as the best card at the moment. If that's the case, I would like to help you. Mimir, who was in the form of Thor, frowned. It was because he had a sudden headache. I'm a bit tired right now. It's okay, get some rest first. He had already used too much knowledge. It was forbidden to push him any further. If he were to fall asleep right away because he tried to use more knowledge, Wu Jin wouldn't be able to avoid Odin's hammer. Wu Jin also wanted to avoid that. It would be hard for Mimir to help me with the outer gods anyway. If Kronos had become an outer god, Mimir's eyes wouldn't be very effective against him. If so, it was his problem from here on out. The fight with them is my field. He didn't know about other fields, but when it came to fighting the outer gods, Wu Jin was confident that he knew more than Mimir. Therefore, he didn't need Mir's help with this. The fact that Kronos had become an outer god was enough to end his duties. Let's go out for now. He had made Heracles and Hargan wait for too long. His next destination was set. It was time to stop delaying. I'll see him for the first time in a long while. It was probably the first time since the end of Ragnarok. The strongest matador in the tower. The absolute being who had single-handedly created the large guild called Asgard, and had never been defeated. The strongest ranker that Wu Jin knew. Odin. 100th floor. A world without night, with bluer skies than any other floor of the tower. Under the skies of that world, blue waves moved like tides, bluer than the sky. Crash. The waves crashed, neatly sweeping away the grains of sand. The beach sparkled like a jewel under the sunlight. And in the middle of it all, there was a tall man with a more comfortable expression than if he was lying on a luxurious bed. It really was. A man with blue hair and beard. Poseidon, with a dazed face, raised his body again and looked around. His body, soaked in water, was in its most comfortable state. The beach with crashing waves was as comfortable as a bedroom to Poseidon. He wondered why he had opened his eyes here. Whoosh. Poseidon stretched out his hand towards the trident stuck next to where he had been lying. I don't need this anymore. Splash. A drop of water appeared in Poseidon's hand and began to take a certain shape. The shapeless water soon hardened and turned into a long, blue spear. And then, thud, Poseidon, who had grabbed the spear, threw it hard towards the middle of the ocean while sitting down. Rumble. Boom, boom, boom. The ocean where the spear had landed rose up, creating a giant blue pillar. An explosion large enough to crush a small city in an instant, along with hundreds of tsunamis, began to spread out around it. It was truly a fearsome force. It was obvious that the spear he had created with no difficulty. It really is a success. A spear created by compressing the power of the vast ocean. Poseidon considered this spear to be just like Zeus's lightning. It had the same spear shape, and its power was not much different. Snap, triangle. It was the name of the spear that he had intended to create using the ocean stone when he got his hands on it. Poseidon gave the spear he had created for the first time that name. And it also meant that Poseidon himself believed that he had reached the same realm as Zeus. With this power, he could return to Olympus again and start anew. Clench. Poseidon clenched his fist and got up, brushing himself off. The test was over. He had become a completely different being. Just like that, it was the moment when Poseidon was about to go down again. Splash. The ocean in front of Poseidon's eyes rose up and began to take shape. The power to move the ocean. This wasn't something Poseidon had done. What the hell? Just as the figure began to take on a human form, Poseidon was about to say who the hell it was. His pupils gradually widened at the face that was completed. Although he couldn't tell the exact color of the hair or eyes because it was made of clear blue seawater. Zeus. It definitely had the same face as the Zeus that Poseidon knew. Chapter 363. Wu-Won quickly prepared to head to Asgard. There wasn't much to prepare for. Before leaving, he greeted Hades, the representative of Olympus. "You're going to Asgard?" Heracles asked Wu-Won, who had just met Hades. He didn't remember telling him where he was going. Wu-Won noticed Heracles' gaze turned to Thor, who was waiting for him at the end of the hallway. "Did you think I wouldn't notice for this long? Since when? I had a hard time waiting in that damp cave. It smelled worse than I thought." It seemed that Heracles had already broken his illusion since the time Mimir and Wu-Won were talking. Of course, Hargan might not have been able to, but it wouldn't be impossible for someone like Heracles to break Mimir's illusion. Furthermore, he had been given half a day. Who was that, really? Of course, he seemed to have noticed the existence of the illusion, but he didn't seem to have noticed Mimir's true identity as Thor. Somehow, as he returned to his original form, Heracles' gaze toward Mimir seemed unusual. "It's Mimir." "Mimir?" Heracles asked after chewing on the name for a moment. "Odin's friend." "Yes. Why is he here?" Mimir was Odin's friend, who was known to awaken once every 100 years. His activity was so low that his name was almost forgotten in the world, so it seemed that it took Heracles some time to remember. However, regardless of his rank, his position within Asgard was never low. Odin had instructed everyone in Asgard to treat Mimir the same as himself. "Do you want to know why?" "I'm curious." "It's because of Kronos." "Kronos?" A brief pause. Soon, Heracles nodded and opened his mouth. "I see. I understand. Have a good trip." Unlike other times, he would have asked who Kronos was and why he was going to Asgard because of him. He just let it go as if it was nothing. As expected, I had a hunch. He hadn't brought it up because he knew this would happen. Even if he had said anything, Heracles wouldn't have understood anyway. And it wasn't just Heracles, it was the same for everyone. "We won't be able to work together on this anyway." Eugene paused for a moment and looked at Heracles. It felt a bit early, though. That guy back then. That guy, Atlas. Eugene decided to hurry things up a little. "There's a way to defeat him." Heracles' pupils shook slightly. Even without this, Heracles had been endlessly replaying his fight with Atlas in his head recently. The guy who had a much tougher body and strength than him. He could still clearly see Atlas, laughing heartily as he bit his arm. "What is it? Go higher, higher." Eugene repeated to Heracles, who was wondering what he was talking about, the same words he had said to Zeus and Poseidon. Hades had already heard the same story. However, he had given up because he couldn't leave Olympus for long. The choice is yours. Live as a carpenter without fighting anymore. Or go higher. When there was no war, Heracles introduced himself as a mere carpenter. He had always been like that. He loved peace more than fighting and preferred lazy and boring days. That was why Eugene didn't force Heracles to join this fight. Of course, he already knew which way the choice would go anyway. "I'll see you later." Eugene headed to the sun carriage with Mimir. According to the original plan, they should have boarded right away. How do we find that guy? Something else was more urgent now. Asgard, the richest and most beautiful country in this world. The absolute kingdom ruled by the strongest high-ranker, Odin. After Ragnarok, Asgard had entered an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity. And at that moment, this isn't good. This isn't good. The king of the kingdom, Asgard. He was enjoying his lunch and muttering while looking out the window. Krokra, a name that vaguely came to mind. But it was a name that he couldn't remember. It was strange. Crowdaw. Even though Mimir had clearly told him the name, he had forgotten it right away. He said it was a side effect of the chronos, hourglass, but no matter how many times he repeated the name, he quickly forgot it. No, this was a difficult situation for Mimir, who had intended to enter quietly. In the middle of the bustling street, people cheered as they made way for him. Thor. The prince walked down the street, cheered by the people. His whole body was made of muscle, a true warrior of this era. That's me. He kept a serious face on the outside, but he enjoyed the cheers on the inside. With his chest puffed out, Thor accepted the handshakes of the citizens. If you have any troubles, please tell me anytime. Is the farming going well? This bread looks delicious. I'll eat it with gratitude. He communicated with the people without formality. That was Thor's ideal image of a king. That was why he often left the palace and mingled with the people, so people naturally cheered when they saw him. Thor. Not far away, he could hear the voices of the citizens calling out his name. Can they even see me over there? They were already cheering his name, even though they didn't know he had come. He thought he should go there quickly. His steps naturally quickened. However, Thor, long live Prince Thor, the cheers were not directed at him. What the? A man with the same face as him. It seemed that the people had mistaken that man for him. No, isn't that me? What on earth was going on? As Thor was bewildered, Thor, what the hell have you been up to? Didn't I tell you? You picked the wrong person if you wanted to get in without being suspected. Yuan and Mimir had been in this state ever since they arrived in Asgard. Cheering citizens, people asking for handshakes. It was a difficult situation for Mimir, who had wanted to enter quietly. It can't be helped. If it becomes known that I have come out, those guys won't stay still. That's why you chose Thor. I thought Thor would be good enough. He wouldn't get involved in unnecessary trouble, and he could be treated well wherever he went. It was a choice made without much thought. But now, Mimir couldn't help but regret his choice for the first time in a long time. I didn't know he would cause such a fuss. It had been over 50 years since Thor had started walking around outside the palace. Mimir, who had been in a deep sleep, couldn't have imagined that Thor would receive this much attention. There was no need to use his eyes to find out about Thor. Besides, the situation has become a little difficult. Yuan found a familiar face approaching through the crowd surrounding them. You guys, a thunderous voice. How dare you pretend to be the real thing when you're just a fake? Thor stepped in front of Yuan and Mimir. With a face full of anger, he raised his head stiffly, still looking confident and without a trace of shame. The people's gazes gathered, their shoulders rose by a foot. That's his biggest flaw. Yuan sighed at the sight of Thor. Excessive sense of justice, and a heart that cares for Asgard. Those things were all good, but Thor had one serious flaw. Attention deficit disorder. He craved their attention as much as he cared for his people. And because of that, despite his high position as a prince, he had always met their eyes and received their ardent support. As a result, the gains outweighed the losses, but it was a little disappointing in the current situation. This outrageous guy. How dare you be so disrespectful to the prince? Apologize right now. Bam, bang, bam, what? Thor's eyes widened in surprise. Just now, the citizens who had been around him had suddenly become angry and were throwing fruits and small objects at him. An unexpected situation. Yuan glanced at Mimir. Did you do that? It couldn't be helped. In the eyes of the people, Thor must have looked like a completely different person. Mimir's illusion didn't just change the way Mimir looked. Right now, in their eyes, Mimir probably looked like Thor, and Thor looked like a completely different person. What the hell happened? And then, once again, Thor found Mimir in front of him, and Mimir's original appearance came to his mind. What the? Be quiet. A small whisper. Thor met eyes with Mimir and gulped before nodding. The only friend Odin had, who woke up once a century. And also, the adult in Asgard who had changed Thor's diaper when he was young was Mimir. Thud. Mimir started walking again as he opened his mouth. You're going to get an earful when you get back. Yes. His response was much quieter than before. Thor and Yuan made eye contact. At the same time that Mimir's original appearance became visible, Yuan's original appearance was also revealed. It was the first time they had seen each other in a long time, but they didn't greet each other. Instead, Yuan had to receive Thor's resentful glare. Thor followed along grumbling. Yuan glanced at him and asked, how do you plan on finding Kronos? No one would know anything about Kronos anyway. Among the countless crowds, Mimir answered Yuan's question. Finding him isn't a problem. Then, The problem is finding someone to deal with him. Thud. Outside the palace, among the bustling crowd, a being with an unusually large presence walked towards Mimir. If the people had cheered for Thor's procession, it was the opposite this time. The people who had cheered for Thor, the people who had been going about their own business, wondering what was going on. Even the ignorant children who had been making a lot of noise. Odin, that idiot, thud, as he came outside, everyone quietly closed their mouths and started to put their hands together. I guess his memories have come back a little. Chapter 364. In the conference room with a long, round table. There were only 3 people in the room that was decorated with an expensive round table imported from the guild, round table, and expensive paintings. Yuan, Mimir, and Odin. The 3 of them sat around the round table. Thor, that rascal, has been doing useless things. Odin looked at Thor, who was made to stand outside the conference room with his hands up, with displeasure. Thor's arms were in shackles that weighed 10,000 jun. Even for Thor, a high ranker in the tens, it wouldn't be easy to carry that kind of weight. Even though it was a childish form of punishment. Odin thought that this kind of punishment was more direct. Care for your people, but do not seek their attention. I'm sure I told you not to get those 2 mixed up long ago. In fact, if you looked closely, there was no big problem with Thor's actions. It was just a matter of where his attention was directed. A king should care for his people, but he should not seek their attention. That was Odin's theory of a king, and Thor had recently been mixing the 2 up. How much longer are you going to make him stand like that? About a month or so. Maybe then he'll reflect on his actions. He's going to suffer. As the 2 of them talked, Yuan looked at Thor, who was standing outside the door with his arms up. His arms were already trembling. Even so, he clenched his teeth and endured, probably knowing that a greater punishment awaited him if he lowered his arms. Well, let's just leave that guy there. Swish. Odin put his 2 hands together and placed them on the round table. Let's start with the story of Kronos. Yuan and Mimir's eyes sparkled. Kronos. Finally, that name was mentioned from Odin's mouth. Did you remember? As I kept thinking about it, it slowly came back to me. Once I remembered the first 2 letters, the other 2 letters came to me one after another. Just being able to do that was amazing. The clockwork was a joint work between Odin, Mimir, and Kronos. Odin was the 3rd person, after the Demon King and Mimir, to overcome the power of the clockwork and remember Kronos. Of course, all I remember is his name and face. I have almost no memories of him. I'm not much different, I only have fragments of memories. There's no need to remember. It'll just backfire if you do. Yuan's words drew the attention of Mimir and Odin. At the looks on their faces, Yuan shook his head. Kronos, Mimir, Odin. The 3 of them were high rankers who entered the tower around the same time, and they were closer than anyone else. If their memories of him returned, would Odin and Mimir be able to fight properly? It can't come to that. Yuan thought of the 3 of them getting drunk and talking nonsense with their arms around each other. They fought each other to kill each other with all their memories intact. Why are you guys worried about Kronos like that? That way's impossible. Well, if you insist. Odin shrugged and stopped thinking about Kronos. Memories that didn't come to mind easily anyway. There was no need to force himself to remember something that wouldn't do him any good. So, will something happen if we leave him like this? Yes, it will. That's right. The answers came from Yuan and Mimir at the same time. Both of their answers were filled with conviction. The reason was the same. Mimir was vaguely anxious about Kronos, who had turned into an outer, and Yuan had come from the future, where that anxiety had become a reality. Really, one was his best friend, Mimir, and the other was a high ranker who had foreseen Ragnarok and put a period at the end of it. Their answers were something Odin couldn't just ignore. Then first, we need to move with just fragmented memories. I'll tell you about Kronos' abilities. This place was created because of Kronos. What they needed to talk about now wasn't Kronos and their memories of him. What was important were Kronos' abilities, his current situation and location, and his purpose. Those were the things that mattered. Yuan talked about Kronos' abilities that he remembered. Skills that controlled time by using his mana and the time given to him. Mimir and Odin were quite surprised by the skill that was only allowed to one person in the tower. He controls time. It's a great skill, even with the conditions. The question is whether he still has that skill. For some reason, Kronos had become an outer. According to Zeus, he seemed to have maintained his original appearance to some extent, but it was unknown whether he still had the skills he originally had. For now, they had no choice but to assume that he still had his skills. Then the countermeasures for the skills. I'll take care of that. It was Odin who spoke. Odin was the strongest warrior Yuan knew, not to mention anyone else. Since he had been told about his abilities, he must have already come up with a strategy against him. Yuan nodded and continued. Then all that's left is his location and purpose. Yuan's gaze turned to Mimir this time. It was very likely that he would have the answer to this. However, I can't see it with my eyes. Unfortunately, his eyes didn't work very well on the outer. Even the eyes that could see everything in the tower couldn't reach the beings outside the tower. Is that so? Even Mimir's eyes, which he had trusted, couldn't be relied on. Yuan rested his chin in his hand for a moment and fell into thought. If I know his purpose, I'll be able to figure out where he is. The first step was important. Purpose. He knew about the plans of the foolish mix chaos, but Kronos was different. Purpose. As Yuan was deeply lost in thought. Why are you guys so concerned about Kronos? At Mimir's words, Yuan raised his head. If you think about the reason again, you might find the answer. Reason. Yuan's forehead was deeply wrinkled. Even if it was just a passing remark, it was different when it came from Mimir's mouth. No matter how much his strength had waned from being linked to an existence outside the tower, Mimir was still Mimir. Every word he spoke always hit the mark and pierced the truth. As he chewed on Mimir's words a few times. Zeus. Zeus's words came to Yuan's mind. Kronos had appeared before Zeus. If he had appeared to reunite with his son, he would have said something and disappeared. However, Kronos did not. He had appeared before Zeus and then suddenly disappeared again. That meant, it's Poseidon. Yuan's voice was filled with conviction. The silent interior was ventilated. Odin, who had been holding back his silence, asked. What are you talking about? Kronos must have gone to find Poseidon. Poseidon. Originally, he was after Zeus, but that failed. It was certain that Kronos' intentions were not very good. If he was the one who came through the door and the first person he looked for was Zeus, then the front and back matched roughly. Zeus can't be easily touched, even by Kronos. At this point, Zeus had become one of the strongest beings in this tower. That was why he had appeared before them for a moment and then disappeared again. And if the reason he had originally targeted Zeus was because of his bloodline, the next target is likely to be Hades or Poseidon. It wasn't Hades. He was currently in Olympus. The boundaries of Olympus had been greatly strengthened after the recent incident, and it would not be easy to target him. More than anything, Heracles was by his side. It wouldn't be easy to touch him. Poseidon. Odin repeated Poseidon's name over and over. Perhaps from now on, Asgard would do everything they could to find Poseidon. Mimir's influence within Asgard was that strong. If only the test was over, it wouldn't be that difficult to find him. If Poseidon had passed the upward test and come back down, it wouldn't be that difficult to spot the giant with the striking blue hair. Moreover, Asgard's eyes were everywhere in this tower. With this, the general direction was set. There was only one problem left. Why on earth had the foolish confusion let Kronos into this place? Was he after me, or did he have a bigger picture in mind? As the conversation between the three was coming to an end. Big trouble, an urgent voice was heard outside the conference room. Creak, a man who dared to open the door without even asking Odin's permission. Odin's second son, Loki. Father, what's the matter? What is it? Loki opened his mouth, not caring about Odin's stern expression, as if he wouldn't leave it alone if it wasn't something serious. On the first floor. Swish, a wave crashed. It was a gentle wave. The waves moved along with the wind, crashing beautifully against the rocks. Thud, the broken water droplets glittered in the sunlight. At first glance, it might look like any beach, but one would soon find something strange. The rocks that the waves crashed against. They weren't ordinary rocks. What is this? Hephaestus stood on the roof with his hammer in hand. The rocks that the waves crashed against were all someone's houses. The city was submerged in a giant body of water, and everyone on the first floor had drowned. It was all the doing of one person. Can you handle this right now? Talk. As soon as the blue-haired man, Poseidon, stepped forward, the waves calmed down as if they had never been there. Poseidon, who had submerged the city on the first floor in just a few minutes, laughed as he looked at Hephaestus. Are you scared? It was a non sequitur. He responded as if he didn't even care about Hephaestus' question in the first place. But rather than feeling offended, Hephaestus just felt something strange. It's not just that his condition is strange. Gulping. It was a thought he had ever since he first came down to the lowest floor of the tower. A place that he, one of the three gods, would never visit. A city on the first floor wasn't a noticeable enough place for someone like Poseidon to use as a stronghold. Furthermore, he's a completely different person. Poseidon's gaze was so different from the person Hephaestus knew that it was hard to believe. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come down to the first floor out of the blue and acted out like this. He ignored the penalty and slaughtered people. No rancor, except for a select few, would be able to avoid this kind of storm and tsunami. Clang! Hephaestus glared at Poseidon with his hammer in hand. It was obvious what would happen next. He'll be here soon. As soon as he said those words, zeezing, space split open between Poseidon and Hephaestus, and the heavens and earth shook. Rumble, kuakang, kuakang. The magic connecting the sky and the earth exploded with rage. The rage headed towards Poseidon, who had dared to do such a thing, and crushed both of his shoulders. And Poseidon laughed at the weight. Yes, that's right. An existence that hated the intervention of rancors more than anyone else in the tower. An existence that protected and ruled the laws of the tower. I've been waiting for that guy. Thud. The administrator appeared in front of Poseidon. Chapter 365. Thud. The heavens and earth shook. The manager's appearance shook the world. Under the manager's furious magical energy, the waves began to flow in reverse. The manager approached Poseidon. What are you thinking? Rattle. With a single word, Poseidon's shoulders were crushed. At the same time, Poseidon's blue eyes flashed. In this tower, the manager was no different from a god. I didn't do anything without thinking. This is the only way to meet the manager. The manager's eyebrows twitched. He thought Poseidon would be bewildered to see him, but his reaction was completely different from what he had expected. Were you waiting for me? He defied the laws of the tower to meet him and flooded the city on the first floor. He was unconventional and arrogant. His attitude seemed to suggest that he could easily defeat someone like him if he set his mind to it. He had no intention of letting it slide anyway. Your sins are great. Boom, crack, rumble, the manager's fist struck the void. An earthquake-like force rippled through the atmosphere and reached out to Poseidon. And at that moment, boom, a wave surged up from below, blocking the manager's power and shattering into water droplets. Drip. Before he knew it, he was holding a spear made of condensed water in his hand. Our world. He pointed the tip of the spear at the manager. We have come to reclaim it. Quote quote, quote quote. Silence fell over the conference room. A video from an unknown source. In the video they saw through the player kit, Odin and Mimir had expressions of disbelief. It's not a manipulated video. Odin was not as smart as Mimir, but he was still quite intelligent. No matter how unbelievable the content was, he couldn't simply deny it. You go outside. But father, go outside. At Odin's firm voice, Loki hesitated for a moment before leaving the conference room. The three of them turned their attention back to the player kit that Loki had brought. The kit showed the manager's body lying on the ground with a hole in his chest. Did the manager lose? It was an event that was hard to accept even after seeing it. Mimir looked back at Odin and asked, has this ever happened before? Once. Never. And those words, right away. And Kronos spread that footage to the players in this tower. He was a rancor who was the son of Poseidon and was in charge of harvesting the stones of the sea. And those words meant this. Right now, that bastard is talking. He's telling everyone to come find him. It was truly a confident move. Without the confidence that he would never lose to anyone, it would be difficult to act like this. He probably has one of two intentions. Whoever comes, come and see me. I'll kill all of you. Or, those who want to escape from the shadow of the administrator, come to me. I'll help you do that. That's why we shouldn't move too simply. We still don't know what kind of being Kronos has become, and why he's doing this. Furthermore, we also had to find out the basis of that confidence that allowed him to kill the administrator and turn numerous guilds into his enemies. Well, anyway, it's clear that time is not on our side. Thud. Yuan was the first to get up from his seat. We were the ones in a hurry. Even at this moment, Poseidon's power would be growing. He would set up a base on the first floor and use it to attract the various guilds of the tower. We had to hurry. The longer time passed, the smaller cracks would grow uncontrollably. I'm sorry, mister. As he got up from his seat, Yuan shook off the last remaining memory he had with Kronos. Clang. He put strength into the sword hanging from his waist. It'll probably hurt a little. Yuan hardened his resolve in his mind. It was time to point his sword at him. 3 days had passed since the administrator's death. During those 3 days, Poseidon didn't go anywhere or run away. Instead, he sat leisurely on the ocean he had created, not eating or sleeping. Swoosh. Above the city that had become an ocean. Poseidon sat on the top of the tallest building and looked around. Quote. I like it. This place was his kingdom. A world made of the sea. The wind and the sound of the waves filled with the scent of the sea. Even the humid air. Everything in this world was made for him. And one more thing. Click, click, an army lined up before Poseidon's eyes. Thousands of players and rankers knelt before Poseidon and bowed their heads. Among them, a man who resembled the young Poseidon the most approached. As you ordered, everyone has gathered. Theseus. Theseus. Poseidon's eyes stared at Theseus. Theseus, who had been grasping the meaning behind the words for a moment, opened his mouth again. He was a ranker who, as the son of Poseidon, was in charge of harvesting the stones of the sea. He had been waiting for Poseidon's return ever since Poseidon was imprisoned in Asgard's prison. But he never thought that his return would be like this. Rather, Theseus thought it was good. He's completely changed. Theseus's expression, kneeling in front of Poseidon, was filled with anticipation and excitement. The administrator has collapsed. There are no more penalties in this world. The administrator was a being like a god in this world. His words were the law, and no matter how large the guild, they could not turn the administrator into an enemy. However, the administrator, who was thought to be invincible, was the first to fall at the hands of Poseidon. The Nova Guild has sent word that they want to join forces. The Zodiac Guild has sent word that they want to join forces. The Guild Ga. Theseus relayed the messages he had received to Poseidon. Messages that they wanted to join forces with Poseidon, who had defeated the administrator. All of them were mid-sized or large guilds of considerable size. It seems like everyone wants to get out from under the administrator's shadow. Who should we keep an eye on? There was also a guy who sent word as an individual, not a guild. Tick. Theseus turned the screen of the player kit in his hand. A man with a pale face and long black hair appeared on the screen. Satan. He's the guy who recently quickly rose to 7th place in the rankings. Other than the fact that he's a high ranker of the devil race, nothing else is known about him. This guy too, yes, he says he'll join. The top high ranker, ranked 7th. The power of one person was sure to rival that of a large guild. From Poseidon's perspective, it was like gaining an army of thousands. Their goals are all the same, right? Yes, they ask for our help in getting out from under the administrator's shadow. Satan too. He's a high ranker with an unknown identity who doesn't belong to a guild. Theseus, who had been trailing off for a moment, shook his head. We don't know his motives yet. Is that so? Poseidon, who had been thinking about something for a moment, shook his head. Well, it doesn't matter. Quote. What on earth doesn't matter? Poseidon's eyes stared at Theseus. After a moment of understanding the meaning of the words, Theseus opened his mouth again. As you said, we agreed to gather here in 3 days. We plan to announce the launch of the Ocean Guild on that day. A guild separated from Olympus. If Poseidon, who was known as an invincible administrator, was at the center, it wouldn't be difficult to create a guild that could rival Asgard. After all, there were many guilds that were dissatisfied with the administrator. My father's ranking is already in the single digits. He was the administrator's subordinate, the ranking management bureau, but he was definitely skilled at handling his duties. Poseidon's ranking, which was near the bottom of the double digits, quickly entered the single digits. This was largely due to the fact that he had killed the administrator. An ocean centered around my father will have the power of a large guild, or even more. It will be the only guild not controlled by the administrator. Theseus thought that this dream would be realized in the not-too-distant future. With Poseidon, there was nothing that couldn't be done in the world. However, the children have grown quite a bit. Thud. A voice that poured cold water on the magnificent interior shattered Theseus's dream. Poseidon's gaze turned to the owner of the voice. You've come. It was a calm greeting, as if he had been waiting. Thud. A man with flamboyant golden hair walked leisurely on the water as if he were walking on solid ground. He leisurely passed through the ranks of Poseidon's soldiers. The soldiers involuntarily flinched and made way for him. It wasn't because they felt any particular threat or strong force. It was an aura that only those who had been in the position of king for a long time could possess. It was majesty. WH. Theseus, who had spotted him, opened his mouth with difficulty, his lips trembling. Zeus, why on earth was he here? You seem to have gotten a little carried away with your mischief. Crack, crackle. Zeus, his entire body wreathed in a golden aura, stopped walking in front of Poseidon. My little brother. Chapter 366. Boom, crash. With the appearance of Zeus, the surrounding sounds all disappeared. No one dared to approach him, or even raise their heads. There was only one reason. Because he was Zeus. Answer me. Boom, crash, crash. Coo, cuck. Electricity spread throughout their bodies. Zeus's anger weighed down on their shoulders, and the pain of their whole bodies burning reached them. The strength of an individual overwhelming thousands of rankers and players. Did you think you could do something like this and get away with it? That wasn't just something he said to the other players, including Theseus. Poseidon. He was talking to the one who had killed the administrator and taken over the world of this first floor, the one who had done something ridiculous. Zeus's gaze turned to Poseidon again. Despite his appearance, there was still no wavering in Poseidon's eyes. You're still as arrogant as ever. SWOOSH. A wave rose. As magic power began to rise slowly around Poseidon, Zeus curled his lips. The confidence of the powerless is arrogance, but for those with power, it becomes dignity. That's why you're arrogant. Kya, kya. The waves roared. Dozens, hundreds of waves that had become dragons bared their teeth at Zeus. Poseidon, who stood on the head of the dragon, flashed his blue eyes. You're no match for me. You've definitely changed. Boom, lightning erupted from Zeus's hand. Poseidon's magic power and Zeus's magic power collided in the air. Neither side was pushed back first. A spear of compressed water was also clenched in Poseidon's hand. He had thought it was strange from the beginning, when he first heard the news that an administrator had died at Poseidon's hands. He really is like a different person. His personality itself had changed. Up until now, the Poseidon that Zeus had seen throughout his life had been the most immature of the three gods. He had a hasty and hot-blooded personality, but when it came down to it, he was too scared to attempt anything big. That was why Zeus tended to ignore Poseidon out of his two brothers. But what on earth had happened? He's gained dignity. Of course, players became stronger as they leveled up and honed their skills. But no matter how strong they became, their innate disposition didn't change, or something that hadn't been there from the beginning didn't appear. What the hell happened up there? If Poseidon had taken the same test as he had, and thus gained divinity and power, perhaps such a change would have been possible. However, it didn't seem like such a simple reason. Zeus himself had also gone through the process of obtaining divinity, so he knew well. Suspicious. It smelled so bad, I felt like my nose was going to rot. And this feeling was always right. Then where? I had no choice but to check it out myself. Can you show me the power that killed the administrator? KWA Rung, the lowest world where the administrator had disappeared. In it, the fight between the two gods began. Hiok, 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 Kurung, gurgling, kya. Teshus and the other rankers scattered in all directions. It was to avoid being caught in the lightning and tsunami. In a fight between two high rankers with the power of gods, mere rankers were nothing more than flies. What should we do? That Zeus is the opponent. Kurung. Once again, lightning struck from the sky. The sea surged up and a tsunami crashed over Zeus's body. The rising water spout swirled with golden lightning. Natural disasters were carried out without a hitch. The fight between Zeus and Poseidon was at a level that even high rankers of a certain level could not dare to intervene. Even if it's my father, I can't vouch for it. No. Originally, I wouldn't have been able to say this. Who was Zeus? He was the great king of Olympus and one of the top 10 high rankers in this tower. If there was an enemy in Olympus, it would be difficult to even dare to mention his name. But now, Teshus couldn't hide his excitement as he spoke his worries. Really? Teshus's gaze turned to Poseidon, who was fighting Zeus while cutting through the sea. Really, he's becoming an opponent. In fact, he was half in doubt. No matter how much he confirmed it on video, he had defeated the administrator. Above all, the existence of the administrator was like the sky to the players, and just by looking at it, they couldn't feel how high it was. But Zeus was different. However, Zeus was different. What is the next floor? Although the battle between Zeus and Poseidon continued, Asgard ordered not to help Poseidon, but Odin and U1 believe that if Satan intervenes and defeats Zeus, Asgard's problems will also be solved. When Satan intervened and broke the balance of the battle, U1 thought it was a good thing because it was meant to be against Satan someday. They find the ship of the Zodiac Guild to help Poseidon and prepare to face the battle with the strongest warriors. To the Olympus players, he was above everyone else. It was unimaginable that he would suffer or lose to anyone. Moreover, for some reason, his ranking had risen even higher than its previous position. What about the other guilds? Haven't you heard from anyone else? It was time to borrow the help of another nearby guild. If Poseidon were to lose to Zeus here, it would be the end of everything. What is it? Tell me quickly, it's a bit difficult right now. What? A document came down from Asgard. From Asgard? Yes, they told us not to help Poseidon. My spine tingled. I thought we would run into each other someday, but Asgard has already started to move. No, it wasn't just moving. If they're going to send out an official document, it means they've already sharpened their swords. Why? The first floor was not under Asgard's jurisdiction. That didn't mean that Asgard and the administrator were close, either. I thought it was too fast, even if the sea were to be launched someday and go up one floor at a time to drive out the administrator, and it would collide with Asgard's territory. Still, I contacted the other guilds to hurry a little. I did that too. If support comes from several large guilds, including Satan, it won't be difficult to stop Zeus. Yeah, it's better this way. Catch Zeus here and start the launch of the Sea Guild right away. Maybe this was a much better form than I had originally planned. Since I took down the administrator and even a high ranker with a single-digit ranking. The only problem was Asgard. No, it's okay, Quaggak. Theseus put strength in his hand. At that moment, he was convinced. The fate of the tower will change depending on the outcome of this fight. I am now in a scene of history. And is it because of that tragedy? No one noticed that the color of the sky was gradually turning purple. Except for the two of them. Yuan and Odin, who were on Asgard's ship, came out to the bow for a moment. The pure white scenery passing by before my eyes. It was a landscape that I saw every time I went up and down between the floors of the tower. What floor is next? It's the 7th floor. 7th floor. At Odin's answer, Wu Yun calculated the remaining time. Fortunately, Asgard's ship was a means of transportation that was not inferior to the golden carriage. Probably a few hours now. That would be enough time to reach the bottom of this tower. Mimir, he's resting his eyes for a moment. I see, he must have been straining his eyes for the past few days. Along with that answer, Odin closed his eyes again, turning his gaze back outside the bow of the ship. It seemed like he didn't want to drag out the conversation any longer. Wu Yun, who was cut off abruptly, sat down far away without saying anything more to him. He must be preparing. Before Ragnarok, there were very few cases where Odin fought in person. He already possessed enough power to be known as the strongest among the active rankers, and it was difficult to find someone who would challenge Odin. The senses that had dulled from resting for a long time. It seemed like Odin was trying to regain them during this opportunity. How much more time passed like that? I have a bad feeling. Odin, who opened his eyes again, spoke. It feels like this fight will be the beginning of a bigger fight. There was no way to explain the identity of the anxiety in words. However, it was closer to a conviction rather than a hunch. A bigger fight that would come soon. Odin felt that the death of the administrator and the collapse of the city that existed on the first floor were just the beginning. Why do you think so? Satan has started to move. Satan, the guy who became a single-digit high ranker in the shortest amount of time before Sun Ogong appeared. He hadn't shown much promise until he became a ranker, but at some point, his ranking rose rapidly. Long ago, it was quite a famous anecdote that a mid-level guild that had a conflict with Satan disappeared without a trace at his hands. He's a nihilist. The only thing he's interested in is the destruction of the tower. I know, you know. Odin, who briefly made an expression as if asking how he knew, soon nodded his head. It seems like something happened on your side as well. Sometimes I forget that you came from the future. I thought I would run into him someday. That guy was a real pain in the ass. Evan thought I didn't know how. Satan moved quickly. Thanks to him, the battle changed, but Yuan thought it was a good thing. He was someone he had to face someday anyway. If he could take care of things here, he would have one less thing to worry about later. The fact that Satan moved means that this matter has caught his attention. And it's closer to that damn theory of extinction. It must be because of the administrator's death. The collapse of the system is dangerous. Not only Satan, but also Nova, the 12 Zodiacs, Yongung, and various guilds have joined hands with Poseidon. The cracks have begun. The tower without an administrator. These were guilds that dreamed of that utopia and sought change and revolution. Change in the system always brings blood. They dreamed of driving out the administrators centered around Poseidon. That crack, rumble, it was then, in the pure white landscape. Yuan's eyes caught another ship gradually approaching from the front. I can see it here too. Just in case, he checked it through the Wanjiamjung. It would be a big deal if he had misunderstood a passing, harmless ship. That symbol is the 12 Zodiacs. 12 Zodiacs. It was a guild that was presumed to have joined Poseidon's proclamation. Judging by the fact that Yu-1 and Odin were heading down to the lower floors in their ship, their destination was obvious. Odin and Yu-1's eyes met. The two realized that they were thinking the same thing just by looking at each other. Odin asked as he stepped onto the bow of the ship. Has Zeus already arrived? He has been informed for now, but it seems he doesn't remember Kronos yet. Then what's he fussing about? There's nothing to fuss about. He just moved on his own. Is that so? Clang. A sword in one hand. Odin took a stance for a javelin throw, holding Gungnir in his other hand. Then before we arrive, I guess we should take care of those bastards first. I agree. Swish. The opponent was the 12 Zodiacs Guild. It wasn't the entire guild that had moved, but it was a large guild with a considerable size. On the other hand, they had only brought a minimum number of people because they had moved in a hurry. However, Yu-1 wasn't worried at all. I guess I'll join forces with him for the first time in a while. On this side, the strongest warriors were together. Chapter 367. A giant ship. Countless players had gathered on the bow of the ship heading towards the lowest floor of the tower. We'll be arriving soon. I'm trembling. Are Zeus and Poseidon really fighting? Can we believe it? Hey, they still killed the administrator. Can we really believe that? No one has actually seen it. There are a lot of doubters. They didn't see the ranking. Quiet. Thud. A shock that made the bow sink. The ship shook for a moment and the players staggered. Thud, thud, thud. A large man with a long spear slammed the floor with the butt of his spear and walked towards the bow of the ship. He was about 3 meters tall with a face that looked like a mix between a cow and a human. One of the executives of the Zodiac Guild. Minotaur, the high ranker who took the place of the ox. Stop doubting and be tense, everyone. We'll be in a big battle soon. Yes, yes. Thunderous answers. Even within the Zodiacs, opinions on this matter were divided. Some doubted Poseidon's abilities, and others tried to dissuade the decision, saying it was too dangerous a gamble. However, it was a decision agreed upon by more than half of the 12 stars of the Zodiac. 9 out of 12 votes were in favor. It was impossible to change the decision unless the Zodiacs were torn apart. Clank. He gripped the spear and focused his eyes outside the bow of the ship. This fight was of great significance to the Zodiacs. If we can just finish this, the Zodiacs can see the light. Administrator. Monsters that had blocked their expansion of territory throughout the tower. To push out those who ruled this world with the ambiguous reason of maintaining order and become the masters of that world. That was the utopia that the Zodiacs had. The time has come to achieve our dreams. A determined voice. At Minotaur's words, the players gathered on the ship listened to his voice. Make your wish come true, when our Zodiacs become the best in this tower. It reminds me of when I was in school. Minotaur's brow furrowed. He looked around the Zodiac players with wide eyes. A guy who dared to open his mouth. It was to see what kind of face the guy who had interrupted him in the middle of his speech was making. The principal at that time was just like you. Unlike his playful tone, his expression was quite serious. He was a handsome guy with a sharp jawline. Of course, he didn't have any special features like being particularly large or anything. But for some reason, his face was familiar. Where have I seen him? Kim Yu-1. As someone recognized Yu-1's face, the players, including Minotaur, repeated the same words like a contagious disease. Kim Yu-1. Really? Kim Yu-1 is here? Hundreds of players who had climbed onto the bow of the ship roared. At the commotion, other players and Zodiac's rankers inside the ship came out. Do you only have muscles in your head? There's not a single funny guy who reacts. What is Kim Yu-1 doing here? Thud, thud. Minotaur stepped forward, making the deck rumble. Not only that, but 5 of the Zodiac's high rankers who had appeared after hearing the commotion. The Ox, Goat, Crab, Scorpio, and Sagittarius seats. Swish, whoosh, Zodiac's center spread out to the left and right. Yu-1 rolled up the Wan Kunjung and checked the number of rankers on the ship and their leaders. Zodiac was a large guild consisting of a total of 12 high rankers. And among the high rankers on this ship, the highest leader was Minotaur standing in front of him. Don't you plan on answering? Thud. Minotaur approached right in front of Yu-1's nose. Yu-1 remembered that his ranking was in the 100s. However, this place was close to Zodiac's headquarters. He could understand why he was so confident. I came to give you a warning. A warning? Minotaur's eyebrows twitched at Yu-1's answer. His ferocious expression, resembling an ox, crumpled, and a sense of oppression emanated from him. It seemed like the word, warning, really bothered him. Are you going to help Poseidon? So what if I am? Go back. What? Minotaur's eyes widened and his pupils turned red. Like a bull preparing to charge, he exuded a terrifying aura and took a step closer to Yuan. Thud, the ship shook for a moment from his step. Anyone who wasn't an idiot would have known that Yuan's words weren't a request but a threat. It was only natural that he would be furious. Where do you think you are to dare? If you don't go back, I'll have no choice but to sink you. Do you really think you can do that on your own? Yuan looked up at the voice that came from above his head. It was a woman with long arms and legs hanging from the mast. She was another high ranker from the 12 zodiacs. The high rankers of the 12 zodiacs all had rankings between 200th and 300th. The only high ranker in the top ranks was the Lion's Seat, the master of the guild, but the average ability of the guild was on par with the heavens or the Demon King. On the other hand, Yuan's ranking was in the 50s. It was a high enough ranking, but he was alone. There were 5 high rankers here, including Minotaur, and dozens of other rankers. In the first place, they weren't afraid of fighting Yuan, considering they had the fight with the administrator in mind. However, you refuse. In the first place, that was based on the premise that Yuan was alone. Look behind you. Behind. What's behind? Minotaur turned his head and found a small ship that had gotten close enough to enter his field of vision. A ship developed to move between floors of the tower. He could tell because they were riding in a similar ship, only different in size. No way, right, the flying ship was the symbol of Asgard, and it was the main product they sold. There were plenty of guilds that used Asgard's ships. The probability that the people on that ship were rankers belonging to Asgard was slim. But, why? Gulp. Minotaur felt an intense sense of anxiety that he had never felt before. I'll ask you one more time. That was when Yuan continued speaking. Do you refuse? A repeated offer. For some reason, this time his words sounded quite threatening. It was because of that the answer that had come out resolutely when Yuan was alone was delayed by a beat. But in the end, Minotaur's answer didn't change. Even if Odin himself is on that ship, we, the 12 zodiacs, will not surrender. Is that so? The corners of Yuan's mouth went up. A change in expression for the first time. I hope you really mean that. Swish. Yuan turned around. To cause all this trouble and leave. Swoosh. Yuan's figure turned black and disappeared into the shadows on the ground. Minotaur and the rankers, who had suddenly lost their target, had blank expressions for a moment. What the hell just happened? Paji, Pajijiji. That was when a huge wave of magical energy burst out from Asgard's ship. Something was wrong. By the time that thought came to him, it was already too late. In Minotaur's sight, far away, he could see Odin's face on the bow of the ship. Holding a huge spear in his hand, Odin was in a javelin-throwing stance. And at that moment, Kwang, Gingnir flew out of his hand. Chiji, Kai, Odin, who had thrown Gingnir, looked down. The ship was falling apart and crashing. Gingnir had accurately destroyed the entire ship, including the core, which was the heart of the ship. It was a spear that he had thrown lightly. He couldn't help but worry about the battle that would take place a little later since it was already a little late to throw Gingnir. Even so, if you fall from this height, it would be difficult to survive unless you are a ranker. Above all, Eugene didn't want to delay any longer in this place. Go ahead. With those words, Eugene disappeared right away. There were no other words. Eugene went after the ship that he had crashed without giving them a chance to chase him. He intended to deal with the remaining guys by himself. Odin looked at the rankers of the 12 zodiac signs, who were getting further and further away and becoming smaller. The opponent is the 12 zodiac signs. The 12 zodiac signs were a huge guild. Even if it wasn't the full power of the entire guild, he wondered if he would be okay by himself. Then suddenly, it must be a needless worry. Odin quickly calmed down, wondering who he was worried about. He was a guy who had experienced and overcome Ragnarok. There was nothing more useless than worrying about Eugene, who had won battles against much greater enemies such as Olympus, the Trimurti, and Muspelheim. Don't take too long. Tuck. Gingnir was retrieved in Odin's hand. Without hesitation, Odin's ship began to descend to the first floor again. Kwang, Kwawakwang, Kung, Kurur. The broken ship fell to the ground. Minotaur landed on the ground with both feet, and the other rankers also used their skills and abilities to survive. Of course, not all of them were like that. My leg. Save me. Up here. Players who were crushed by the wreckage of the ship and had broken bones and were badly injured due to the shock of the fall. Minotaur, who had been looking at the players of the 12 zodiac signs blankly for a moment, gritted his teeth. Thud. Odin. From the blow of the guy's spear, the ship that they were riding on crashed, and half of the people on board either died or got injured. An unexpected attack. Anger surged up to his head, and Minotaur's eyes turned completely red as they were filled with rage. And during that time, the face that Minotaur was chasing after appeared before his eyes. Thud, walking through the debris of the ship scattered across the floor was Eugene. Somewhere on the 4th floor. I still have a long way to go. Eugene looked at the reddened sky and the long river that extended far into the distance as if it was nothing. A world that he had already passed once. It wasn't difficult to guess which floor this was. The zodiac signs turned into a battlefield. Eugene, who was calm all by himself, fueled Minotaur's anger. Are you also part of the group? Obviously, Eugene and Odin seemed to be working together. He didn't know why they were blocking their path, or what their purpose was, but such things didn't matter much. At this moment, what mattered to Minotaur was that Eugene before his eyes dared to inflict damage upon the zodiac signs. How dare! Boom, boom, boom. Minotaur's legs bulged, and the force was transmitted through the ground to Eugene. If Olympus had Heracles, then the zodiac signs had Minotaur. Minotaur was a monster with tremendous strength, as the story goes. Swish. Eugene stretched his hand forward. It wasn't clad in black gloves. Once the distance was closed further, the fight from then on would be done with bare hands and not weapons. And that was what Minotaur wanted. You will challenge this Minotaur with strength. It was true that he wasn't confident in a one-on-one fight based on the rankings that he had seen. But if it came to this, the story would be different. You conceited bastard. If Olympus has Heracles. Swish. Quote exclamation mark quote. The strength that gripped his fist. Minotaur's eyes opened wide. A hand as small as a child's hand grabbed hold of his fist and began to squeeze. The zodiac signs have Minotaur. Creak, creak. His right arm bulged. The corners of Eugene's lips slowly went up. Who's being conceited now? The giant's strength fills your arm. Chapter 368. Creak, creak. The Minotaur, whose hand was caught, struggled with all his might to break free from that power. But it didn't go as he pleased. Creak. As if caught in a deep and sticky trap, the grip of the hand grew stronger and stronger. Thud. In the end, the Minotaur fell to his knees and screamed. Kuaa. Even sitting down, the Minotaur was bigger than Wu Wan. However, to the other rankers, Wu Wan, who was hidden behind the Minotaur's back, felt much bigger. The Minotaur. Lost in strength. The Minotaur. A high ranker of the zodiac who symbolized the position of the bull. Ranked 102nd, he was someone who was evaluated to become a high ranker in the double digits within a few decades. As much as in terms of brute strength, he boasted that he was not far behind Heracles, the Minotaur's brute strength was something that everyone in the zodiac acknowledged. But such a Minotaur was being pushed back by someone other than Heracles, not in strength. It was an unbelievable sight even when seen with one's own eyes. Kim Yu-won is also a strong man. I heard he uses a sword. The skills he definitely has. What? Is the information wrong? Most of the well-known rankers had their own characteristics. Fighting with weapons, or using their unique brute strength to engage in close combat, or using skills that were like magic. And as such, there were bound to be some kind of strategies. Wu Wan was the same. Wu Wan was known to use weapons like swords and spears and fight in medium and long-range combat. Naturally, the rankers who had prepared to fight accordingly could not help but be bewildered. If it's about dealing with a strong man, I know it well. Weeing, a high ranker who symbolized the position of an archer in the guild's zodiac. Thud, Robin stepped on the Minotaur's shoulder and jumped high into the air. A jump that was so great that it became a dot high in the sky. Robin, well, if the opponent is a strong man. Fortunately, Robin came with us. Words of relief uttered by other high rankers of the zodiac. Robin was the fastest ranker in the zodiac. The commonality of strongmen was that while they had great strength, their combat range was narrow and their movements were slow. Robin was a kind of natural enemy to such brutes. Creak, Robin aimed an arrow at Yu-won with one hand. The bowstring was pulled back. Brutes will never be able to catch me. That was when it happened. Boom, a pillar of fire shot up. After the pillar reached the sky once, Robin fell down powerlessly, charred black. Thud, Robin, his eyes rolling back in his head, fell behind Yu-won. The kneeling Minotaur and Robin, who had been caught in the pillar of fire, both collapsed. In an instant, two of the zodiac's high rankers had fallen. That was when Yu-won's other hand grabbed Minotaur's head and slammed it into the ground. Bam, crack, crackle, Minotaur's head was smashed into the ground. Yu-won let go of his hand and started walking towards the other zodiac high rankers. Time is running out. Crackle, electricity burst from his hand. I can't wait for you to come to me. He sent Odin first. He couldn't waste time here. You go first. Yuan threw the golden lightning he was holding in his hand up. Then, boom, in the sunset sky, yellow lightning began to strike. Uranus's heart creates lightning. What is this? The zodiac's rankers gaped at the lightning that appeared in the sky. There was nowhere to run. And there was no way to block it. Rank 53. A high ranker with a rank that rivaled Hades, one of the three gods of Olympus, the king of Olympus. That's why he didn't let his guard down. Or so he thought. This is on another level. How can a rank 53 inches? Damn it, what the hell is this? Rank 53 was ridiculous. The guild leader of the zodiac. Even the Lion King, who symbolized the position of the lion, didn't have this much power. The amount of magic power he felt was on a different level to begin with. A power that could turn the world upside down. There wouldn't be more than 30 rankers in this tower who could do this. Run away for now. What? Are you serious? Where are we supposed to run to? If we all fight together, we can definitely. Damn it, I don't know either. The rankers turned and ran away. Even those who tried to fight against the thunderbolt. Their judgments differed depending on the situation, but their thoughts were the same. After this fight is over, Kim Yuan's ranking will be much higher than it is now. Quirang, Kugugugang, the rain of lightning began to fall. Screams were buried in the storm of magical power that swept across a wide area. And in that storm, I'll tie up his movements. There were still those who did not give up. Chuaik, the high ranker of the ram sign. Nibble's fur wrapped around Yuan. I'll take his legs, the high ranker of the crab sign. The 4 swords wielded by crab cut off Yuan's 2 legs. Finally, swoot, without a sound, a venomous green stinger shot towards Yuan's neck. The high rankers rushed in from 3 directions almost simultaneously. Just as all the skills were about to hit Yuan's body. Zhang, Ziozheng, Shua, Piok, something that rose from Yuan's shadow blocked them. Kong, Kakakong, Suroruk, the 4 swords that were aimed at his legs fell to the floor. The fur that had surrounded his body was cut into countless red lines and scattered into dust. Finally, the poisonous stinger was stuck in the arm of the man who appeared in front of Yuan. Poison, Qi, the flesh where the stinger was stuck melted. But the man didn't seem that flustered. Are they the rankers of the zodiac? Susano. Oh, that bastard, it's been a while. Crab, the high ranker of the zodiac who used 4 swords with 4 arms, was startled when he recognized Susano. Susano, the strongest of the 3-eyed, Crab and Susano had faced each other once a long time ago. Of course, the result was Crab's defeat. At that time, Crab was so shocked by the incident that he couldn't even hold a sword for a while. What should I do with them? Susano, holding the kusanagi in his hand, asked in a voice full of anticipation, as if he wanted Yuan to give him an order quickly. Having come out into the world after a long time and started wielding his sword, he was once again making a ghostly expression. And naturally, Yuan's answer to that question was, kill them. It had been decided since Susano was summoned. At the same time, Quirang, in another world not too far away, a force of the same attribute let out a boisterous sound. Boom, rumble, rumble. Poseidon's body was buried deep into the ground by the baptism of lightning bolts that poured from the sky. Gigantic holes. The downpour of lightning bolts made a boisterous sound again, as if it were announcing the end of the world. Crackle, like a scene from a horror movie, Zeus revealed himself under the dazzling lightning bolts. In the middle of the gigantic hole, Zeus looked at Poseidon, who had collapsed. Have you died? Creak, snap, as if to finish him off if he was still alive. Zeus looked at Poseidon while holding another lightning bolt in his hand. Unlike the one that had collapsed on the floor like a corpse, there was not a single large, injured area on Poseidon's body. Was that it? Creak, supporting himself on the floor with one hand, Poseidon slowly got up from his spot. You sure do know how to say rude things politely. He spoke in a relaxed voice, as if nothing had happened. Among the remains of the city that had disappeared without a trace and the seawater that was pouring down the hole, Poseidon raised his head with a dusty face. Is this the end? He looked truly exhausted. How many times had he gotten back up after all this? You look like a cockroach, brother. Poseidon's attribute was water. And the magical power of the water attribute was most specialized in defense. And somewhat, it also had healing properties. That was why Poseidon, who wielded the power of the ocean, was more specialized in long-term battles than anyone else. He could protect his body, recover from injuries, and continue to fight almost indefinitely. The only way to defeat Poseidon was to unleash an attack that surpassed his defensive and recovery powers. And Zeus thought he was capable enough to do that. However, thank you for the compliment. It did not go as he pleased. Wriggle, the moisture around Poseidon's body rippled. No, it was not just around Poseidon. Thud, thump. A pressure that weighed down on Zeus's body. Swish. Poseidon reached out his hand towards Zeus, who was standing on the sky. Do you know what that is? Crash. His hand clenched, and along with the strength of his grip, the force applied to Zeus's body also grew stronger. Water exists everywhere. Gulp, gulp. Zeus's arm was twisted. Poseidon was specifically aiming for the arm that was holding the thunderbolt. Crack, crack. The thunderbolt was being dangerously shaken. As his arm was shaking, the shape of the thunderbolt that was clutched in his hand also began to shake. Zeus's gaze headed towards his own arm that was beginning to get crushed and twisted under the pressure. To be able to apply this much pressure from this distance. It seems like it's not just your millstone and recovery power that has improved. Poseidon had gotten stronger. He clearly knew that he was a completely different person than before. But do you know something? Kuik. His arm was swelling up. His arm that was being pressed down by the water was gradually returning to its original place. His veins were clearly visible, and the thunderbolt in his hand regained its power. That I'm stronger than you. Quarring. The thunderbolt made a furious noise. The water that had been wrapping around Zeus's arm dispersed, and in an instant, his energy rose. Quarring, quarring. That wasn't the end. Hundreds of storms of electric shocks began to swallow the area around Poseidon. Zeus slowly came down from the sky and matched his height with Poseidon. The storm of electric shocks fiercely stormed in. Unlike before, it didn't immediately cover Poseidon's body. What are you doing? I remembered. It wasn't a short amount of time. Zeus was able to look at Poseidon and confirm that he definitely wasn't the brother that he had known. And now, who you are? Through Poseidon's eyes that were right before him, Zeus was seeing a completely different face. Swoosh. As he said that, Zeus looked up at the sky. At some point, the sky had started to turn purple. This sky wasn't something that Zeus was seeing for the first time. Perhaps it was the second time. The first time was when he was dragged out of his throne in Olympus, and the second time was. I should thank that guy. Because thanks to him, I was able to see you again. It must have been when the being that was right before his eyes had appeared before him. That day when the purple sky had opened up. The day when countless gods outside of the world had revealed themselves. Isn't that right, Father? That was when he had appeared. Chapter 369. What a mess, man. You're telling me, Zeus gets dragged down, then Ragnarok happens. And now the admins. Clink, clink, a daytime drinking party. The 10th floor's Murum world. Players sitting in the middle of town tipped back glasses of alcohol and ate snacks. The end times, man. What's the world coming to? What's going to happen to the first floor now that the admin is dead? Well, it's pretty much done for, right? Yeah, but on the other hand, I kind of think it's a good thing. What? Well, it means we don't have any more restrictions, right? No more penalties up there, they say. Oh, is that right? So, it is a good thing. Geez, how can it be a good thing that the admin is dead? Without them, this tower will be a total lawless zone. Well, even so, a world without admins. It was the most talked about topic among players these days. For those who had been born and raised in the tower, the presence of the admins had always been as constant as the air they breathed. And it wasn't much different for players who had recently entered the tower. The tower's entire system was built around the admins, and a world without them was unimaginable. But what if there were no admins? What would the world be like? No one knew. And so, opinions were divided, and those who wanted to be independent from the admins began to emerge. Of course. Well, whatever. What does it matter to us? For those who had stopped at the 10th floor and settled down in the Murum world, it was a story that didn't really concern them. I've been in the tower for 500 years now. Bullshit. Not 500 years, 50 years. You're full of it again. No, really, how could you have lived for 500 years with those skills? You would have died of old age long ago. Well, back in my day. The topic of conversation changed in an instant. The story of Poseidon killing the admin on the first floor and gathering a new force was a distant tale to them. For now, they were content to settle down in a world that was just fine as it was, finding something to do each day and drinking like this. But then, bzz, bzz. Whoosh, their player kits began to ring at the same time. Oh, hold on a sec. I'm getting a message on my kit. Me too. What is it? All at the same time. The same message was delivered to everyone's kit. They didn't have high expectations. This kind of thing happened often. Another advertisement from some sect or other, I bet. But then, the players who checked the message began to get up from their seats one by one. I have to go. Really? You too? I'm going too. You idiots. Looking at his friends who were hesitating, one player let out a frustrated curse. This is our chance. Clang. The key was still clutched in his hand. He stared at the cup he had been drinking from, recalling the message that had been conveyed through it. To dream again. Crackle, crackle, the world was enveloped in golden lightning. Poseidon opened his mouth in the midst of that silent world. Father. His eyes seemed thoughtful. As expected, Zeus had never seen such a look in Poseidon's eyes before. Surrounded by a storm of golden currents, Cronus closed his eyes for a long time. Then, after a long while, he opened his eyes and asked. Do you remember me, Cronus, the king who ruled my kingdom before I ruled Olympus? My father. There were many ways to describe the being before him. Zeus had clearly remembered his identity. More accurately, it would be right to say that he had finally realized it. I don't know why I couldn't remember you until now. Zeus was different from others. Unlike friends or acquaintances who became strangers when forgotten, Zeus and Cronus were connected by blood. A son cannot exist without a father. However, for all that long time, Zeus had never once thought about the existence of a father. It was strange, no matter how he thought about it. So what are you going to do now? Zeus had remembered him. Was it because they were connected by blood? Or was it because they had been staring into each other's eyes for so long? Or perhaps, had contacting him once caused some kind of variable? Zeus answered Cronus's question, will anything change? Rumble, crackle, the surrounding lightning, which had paused for a moment, suddenly changed. You are my enemy. Why? Because the inside and outside of this world cannot coexist. Kya, like the cry of a dragon, golden lightning shot up into the sky along Zeus's fingertips. Is that your answer? Inside and outside. Zeus had already crossed the boundary between the two worlds. Moreover, he knew that they would not leave their world alone. Get out of our world. Zeus was clearly aware. Rumble. A huge storm engulfed Cronus's body. The ground collapsed and the world was momentarily blacked out with golden light. Crackle, crackle, and within that storm, the body of Poseidon that Cronus had possessed was torn apart and burned. The power of the sea that had been protecting his body was no longer of any use. Well, I expected this to happen. As his body was torn apart. Tisk, tisk, tisk. The golden current that had been pouring towards Cronus gradually began to stop. No, tisk, tisk, tisk. More than stopping, it was reversing. Just as the torrential rain that had been pouring down in reverse started to rise back up to the sky, the storm of lightning bolts that had been raging and the lightning dragon that had covered Cronos' head, all reversed their course. All of time had been turned back. Time. Zeus's eyes narrowed. Time reversal. That was definitely a unique skill that Cronos possessed. Even within this tower where numerous mysteries from different dimensions were mixed together, Cronos was the only ranker who could manipulate time. Time that had turned back to the past within a single space. There was something different. Zeus looked at Poseidon, who had stood up and was now looking at him eye to eye. No, he was now looking at a man with a black beard and hair, a man with the exact same face as him. You've aged a bit more than I remember. That's thanks to you. Cronos' tone was indifferent. It felt strange. It was clear that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Even in his own memories, Cronos had left Olympus a long time ago. But why was it? Zeus felt as if the Cronos in front of him was a complete stranger, someone he was seeing for the first time. What do you want? To find our world again. Zeus raised his head at Cronos' answer. The sky, which had now turned completely purple. Are you talking about those guys? The door had not yet opened. However, it wouldn't be strange if it opened at any moment. They're really fearless, even after dying like that. Where in the world were they all pouring in from? Zeus muttered to himself like that and looked back at Cronos. When that foolish chaos had opened the door, he had entered this tower. He was someone from the world that Zeus remembered. However, contradictorily, he was also an existence that did not belong to this world. The aura he was giving off right after he had shed Poseidon's body was proof of that. What happened? Quote. A voice that could only be heard at the end. When Zeus furrowed his brow as if to ask what that meant, Cronos continued speaking. Quote. I can't hear you. Really? Cronos raised his head and looked up while muttering. I guess so. They wouldn't allow it. Allow? Whose permission was he talking about? He hadn't heard a single important thing. Feeling frustrated, Zeus decided to give up on getting an answer to that question. Instead, then let me change the question. Zeus asked something else. What are you trying to do here? As soon as those words left his mouth. Goo. In the purple sky, large ships began to appear one by one. They were ships that were sold in Asgard, as well as means of transportation that various guilds had made themselves and used to move between towers. Starting with the large guild Nova, there were various mid-sized guilds and small guilds. Not only that, but even a sect of Diva, one of the top guilds in the tower, appeared. Zeus's eyes sparkled as the stars began to fill the sky. Are you really trying to capture the administrator and turn the tower upside down with these many guilds? Swish. Cronus lifted his head and looked up at the guilds that appeared in the sky. Dozens of ships, and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of rankers and players riding on those ships. And besides that, there were still many guilds and players gathering on this first floor. Everything is under his plan. The picture was being drawn step by step. This scene was a picture that Cronus had already seen long ago. Of course, in the picture he saw, Zeus was not here. It will flow as it was set. Do you really want the destruction of the tower? Countless gazes poured in. Zeus had never thought he would be scared of numbers. But this time, it was different. The weakest ones were the players on the top floors. The number of rankers alone was in the thousands, and there were quite a few high rankers mixed in as well. In addition to that, there were several top-tier high rankers that even Zeus could not ignore. It seems that everyone was quite excited about the death of the administrator. Who else could gather such forces in this tower? If it weren't for the death of the administrator, such a ripple would have been impossible. Creak, creak, Cronus's face changed back to Poseidon's. Anyway, they knew that Poseidon had captured the administrator, so Cronus changed his appearance accordingly. Cronus, who had put on his mask again, asked, "Are you going to fight alone again?" Again, the Zeus that Cronus remembered was a lone wolf. Even before he was called the god of the three, Zeus was superior to anyone else and always fought his enemies alone. Cronus thought it would be the same this time. However, you seem to be mistaken. This fight was not a fight to do that. Unlike my lacking Hyungs, this time, I have sides to help me. Swoosh. The flow of magic power that was spread in the atmosphere changed. Magic power headed to one place. As if it was going to devour all the magic power in the world, a fearsome energy drifted from far away. While they were coming, there's no way that guy wouldn't do anything. Zeus turned his head towards the direction where the magic power was gathering. Then, far away, a ship was approaching. A small ship that didn't fit in the large battlefield. And the emblem of the greatest guild engraved on the ship. Asgard. Cronus's eyes, which were wearing Poseidon's face, trembled. Above the bow of the small ship that arrived the latest. Odin stood ready, Gingnir in hand, preparing to depart. Chapter 370. Dozens of ships dotted the sky. Each one was a gigantic warship capable of holding hundreds, thousands of players. As expected, Agni, Veda's high ranker, clicked his tongue at the sight before him. He walked out onto the deck with his flowing crimson hair. The scene before him was something even a high ranker like him, who had lived for thousands of years, was seeing for the first time. So, how many guilds have gathered? Thud. The brown-haired woman who approached Agni from behind. Veda's other high ranker, Kubera, looked up at the sky with a curious look. If you include even the small and medium-sized guilds that managed to get their hands on a single ship, it seems like there are over 10. There were this many guilds dissatisfied with the administrator. Even then, it's because of Asgard that there aren't more. Oh, right, Asgard did send out a notice. Asgard's influence was strong. The guild considered the strongest on this floor. No one could laugh at the force that claimed to govern the order of the tower themselves. It was only natural that there would be guilds scared shitless when Asgard sent out a notice telling them not to cooperate with Poseidon. Of course, cowards. Veda wasn't a guild that would be scared by such a notice. Agni laughed as he looked at the guilds before him. Even Asgard wouldn't be able to turn this many guilds into their enemies. Veda was one of the top guilds even among the large guilds. Of course, they wouldn't be able to win if they went to war with Asgard right now, but they had enough power to at least not lose easily. The other guilds here were the same. Excluding the small and medium-sized guilds, some were guilds with enough influence to rule a floor. On top of that, the Zodiac, another large guild, was also on their way here. Swoosh. The flow of magic power changed at that moment. The magic power flowing through the atmosphere began to flow in a certain direction. The movement of magic power became faster, like a blue river flowing rapidly. What the hell? Something was amiss. Agni was a high ranker who had ruled this tower for thousands of years. Rank 191. In other words, there weren't more than 2 beings with more influence than Agni in a single world. And Agni's instincts were telling him. Just because the current was weak, it didn't mean the sea was small. The magic power he felt right now was like that. Agni. And Kubera felt something more than that. Over there. Yeah, gulp. Sweat dripped down Agni's forehead, and he swallowed his dry saliva. I know. The face that came into clear view from far away, as if looking through binoculars. Odin was holding Gingnir in his hand. Gingnir is coming. Prepare yourselves. Gingnir. Veda's rankers began to prepare their defenses. Agni's flames spread out, and the ground rose up on Kubera's magic power, creating a wall. The other guild's ships also noticed Odin's presence. Block it. Hundreds of thousands of rankers began to activate their skills. Rocks gathered together, and an invisible barrier appeared in the air. Magic power of all attributes, such as fire, water, wind, and more, blocked a single direction. For one purpose only, to block Odin's spear, Gingnir. Crackle, crackle, magic power shook violently, but Agni wasn't worried. I've heard a lot of rumors about Gingnir, but he's alone. Most of the beings here were players who had come down from the upper floors. And among them were dozens of high rankers and tens of thousands of rankers. Can a single person break through the defenses created by such a vast amount of power? Even a god, I would dare say, would find it impossible. But it's a good thing, nonetheless. Paget, Pajiji. Odin's body twisted as he took a stance to throw his spear. The other Asgardian rankers are nowhere to be seen, after all. And just like that, the moment Odin finished preparing to throw his spear. Quirung, Quirung, the shape of Gingnir, held in Odin's hand, began to change. Gingnir is activating, a message that appeared in the minds of everyone who saw Gingnir. That message was enough to startle the hundreds of thousands of players. What? It wasn't activated yet, the surprise was only momentary. Gingnir, which had begun activating, flew towards them, consuming all the magic power in the world. Flash. Kwau, a single line embroidered across the sky. And beneath it, Odin set foot on the wreckage of the fallen airships. Numbers alone do not grant strength. Thud, amidst the fallen rankers. A defense that has not been properly assembled is no different from a flimsy house that will be blown away by the wind. Waruk, thud, thud, Odin looked at the pillars of fire that shot up before him and the giant golem made of rock. Agni and Kubera, so you survived, after all. Odin, who had thrown Gingnir, was empty-handed. However, Agni and Kubera could not easily approach him. Drip, blood dripped from Agni's shoulder and fell to the ground. The giant rock golem that Kubera had summoned was also significantly smaller than the size she could normally create. It was the aftereffect of the wound she had sustained from blocking Gingnir. Glancing, Agni looked at the wreckage of the airships that had fallen to the ground and the rankers who were starting to get up, albeit unsteadily. Most of those who had been caught in the range of Gingnir had either disappeared without a trace or had lost their lives instantly. It was a miracle that they were even alive at all. 20% of my energy was lost in a single blow. Gingnir. He had heard the name many times. It was the strongest spear in the tower, an item that was said to have the power to pierce through an entire floor and continue flying up the tower. No matter how exaggerated rumors tended to be, he had thought that it was too much. But that wasn't the case. To think that it was this powerful. There was a story that was known as common knowledge among rankers. That the difference in skill between the top-ranked high rankers wasn't that great. Their rankings were merely a difference in power and achievements, but their skills were said to be only a sheet of paper apart. And Agni wholeheartedly agreed with that idea. Just looking at Kubera next to him, she was ranked lower than him, but their victories and defeats often depended on their condition. He had thought that Odin would be no different. But he's a monster. This was beyond imagination. He had swept away dozens of rankers and hundreds of thousands of players with a single blow. It was terrifying. If only you would use that power for his players. Agni's voice was filled with strength. He wondered what it would have been like if the monster before him had been on their side. He thought that there would be nothing as reassuring as that. Of course, for the players, from Odin's point of view, it was a ridiculous thing to say. The administrator is our enemy. That's what you're saying, is it not? Isn't it? What they desire is order and balance. What order and balance? How does that help us? Kwang. Agni clenched his hand. Even now, it's the same. Even though we're at the very bottom of the tower, the penalty has disappeared. Penalty. The restriction that bound the power of the players of the higher floors. On the first floor world, that constraint disappeared with the death of the administrator. The rankers who came down felt a lightness that was no different from the upper floors. It felt like they had finally found their real world. However, Odin could not accept that opinion. You will kill those who do not help and take away the power they had. Is that what you mean? No, that's not it. Agni closed his mouth. He had nothing to say. What he said was not wrong. The world ruled by the administrator. The greed of the guilds that wanted to share the authority of that world among themselves. It was clear that this was the core of this fight. There is no need for further argument. Rumble. Agni's flames were a signal flare. The surviving rankers of Veda began to surround Odin. You are no longer scary now that you have used Gingnir. Gingnir's ignition was once. It took a long time and a lot of magic power to start it again. No matter how high you are ranked as second, it is because you have Gingnir, the symbol of Odin. Odin had already used Gingnir and still had thousands of rankers. Asgard was a gateway that had to be passed in order to go beyond the administrator. Like the administrator, they were a representative guild that governed the laws and order of the tower. So here, now that Odin had used Gingnir from the beginning, this was the opportunity. Today will be recorded as the day when Asgard's throne changes. Agni's unrelenting hostility. Even though the power of Gingnir had weakened as it pierced the defense and destroyed the ship, Odin sighed as he watched the rankers of several guilds trying to fight back. I guess I've been resting for too long. I wanted to step down with as little sacrifice as possible. It's like even these kids are getting entangled. Quack. Yuan's foot struck down the head of the remaining ranker. All around him were the bodies of the fallen Zodiac rankers and players. Yuan exhaled a long, tired breath. Phew, I thought I was in a hurry, but it was more delayed than I thought. There were so many of them, and they were systematic. The other guys. Just in case, I looked around with the Wan Jiamjung, but there didn't seem to be anyone hiding and preparing for a surprise attack. It was one of two things. He was lying somewhere here, or he had given up the fight and ran away. Finishing. With this, the remaining remnants were surely finished. I had to find another ride. I had something in mind. That's why I had to earn money, no. Points. Hey, errand. Fourth floor world. The moment I was about to call the errand runner working in that world. Click. Runner. Yuan's eyes widened. With the thought of what might have happened, Yuan stopped looking for the errand runner and hurriedly searched through his inventory. It was an item that I had shoved somewhere deep down and forgotten about for a long time since the beginning. I didn't have much use for it, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. As I searched through my inventory, the sound I had heard earlier became clearer. Click, click, my fingertips found the item I wanted. Whoops, I was surprised that I had unknowingly put so much force into my hand. Yuan was surprised, as he couldn't control such small forces as usual. I took my hand out of my inventory. Yuan checked the broken watch he had taken out of it. And that moment, a faint laugh escaped from Yuan's mouth. It was real. Click, the second hand started to move. It was certain, the stopped clockwork had started to work again. Chapter 371. Why is the clockwork? Watching the second hand that had begun to move, Wu-Won couldn't hide his confusion. The clockwork was an item that had already run out of power. When Cronus was sacrificed, the magic power contained within it was naturally depleted. He had only kept it because he couldn't bear to throw it away, but it was an object with no other meaning. The fact that the second hand had started to move meant that its power had returned. Wu-Won used the system just in case. Damaged. This is that is badly damaged. Created this by joining forces with several colleagues. Most of it was marked with question marks, making it impossible to properly confirm the information. However, the fact that the system could check its status meant that the clockwork had become an item recognized by the system. Why? What do you mean, why? Wu-Won looked up at the voice he heard above his head. In the midst of a pure white halo, a small fairy the size of a fingernail was flying with its wings flapping. It was an errand boy. Why do you look at it like that? You called for it. Me, he had forgotten in the midst of such a bewildering situation. Until just now, Wu-Won had been looking for an errand boy. He had only forgotten because of the clockwork. He had thought it had been cancelled because his speech was a little slurred at the end, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Wu-Won looked down at the clockwork that had started moving again in his hand. I'll have to figure it out later. Judging from the fact that it was registered in the system, it seemed certain that the clockwork had regained some power. However, there was no way to confirm why the clockwork had started working right now. Above all, there was another problem right before his eyes. Swoosh, Wu Wen put the clockwork back in his inventory. Even if it was a temporary operation, he couldn't help it. Right now, he had to find his destination first. I need a ride. Was it because Wu Wen was known to be a big spender? The errand boy rubbed his hands together and replied in an affected voice. Yes, you've come to the right place. A ride, the feeling of boarding, getting off, riding, speed. What do you want? Speed, as fast as possible. The cost starts at 100 points and ranges from 1,000 points to 10,000 points. As fast as possible, a repeated answer. The errand boy hurriedly looked for a ride. The story of Wu Wen negotiating the price with the errand boy when he was going to buy adamantium was quite famous among them. Even though they gossiped behind his back, saying that he was stingy even though he had a lot of points, he was the biggest spender when he was actually in front of them. About a minute passed. Just as Wu Wen's patience was about to run out, the errand boy brought out an object. Kihihihing, this is it, the heavenly Pegasus released by the guild, Sky. It's hard to find its lineage now. Here you go, 10,000 points have been consumed. Wu Wen hurriedly paid the points and got on the horse that appeared before him. The Pegasus, which spread its 2 white wings, was a breed that was also popular in Asgard. Among them, the Pegasus of the Sky Guild was known to even surpass the winged angels. It couldn't carry as many people as the replica version of the Sun Chariot or the Asgardian ship, but it would be several times faster in terms of speed. It was a vehicle that Wu Wen needed right now. Is this also part of that guy's plan? Dana had eaten the foolish incarnation of chaos. The foolish chaos's plan had gone awry, and he had made a new plan. Cronus was a part of it. In that case, there was only one thing he could think of that he wanted. If that's the case, Kihihihing. Grabbing the reins, Wu Wen turned the direction of the Pegasus. I'll make the first move from this side. Shuaik. From the sky above, a beam of golden light fell down below. Zeus grabbed hold of Cronus' neck and slammed him down to the ground. No, he tried to slam him down. Time stop. Bam. The 2 people falling down stopped in an instant. There was no stopping distance for the speed they were accelerating at. Time stop. It was Cronus' skill that forcibly stopped time that could not be stopped. At the moment time stopped like that. Swish, Cronus reached out a hand towards Zeus. Crackle, Zeus' figure disappeared from its place along with a golden current of electricity. Zeus, who reappeared 20 or so steps away, found Cronus, who had been reaching his hand out, frozen in place. Do you intend to fight? Isn't it as you see? It meant no, he was not skilled enough to have killed the administrator. At some point, Cronus had been gradually avoiding fighting Zeus and was instead focusing on killing time. Like someone who had finished everything he needed to do. Swish, Cronus turned his head to the side. The flow of magic power he felt far away and the screams of those dying. Even though dozens of guilds had gathered, the battle was not easily over. Is it Odin? Both Zeus before his eyes and Odin who had newly appeared. Both of them were formidable opponents. Experts who would not flinch even if they were several large guilds. Furthermore, fewer guilds than expected had gathered because Odin had sent out an official document. You handled it well. Originally, a much larger number of guilds would have gathered. If so, a sight more magnificent than what was unfolding before his eyes would have been created. This happened because. Is it because of that guy, Kim Yu-won? What the hell is he doing? In Poseidon's memory, he was a guy who was not even ranked that high. Even Cronus, who had possessed his body, had no memory of Kim Yu-won. But that guy kept interfering with the great scheme of chaos. Maybe that was the case this time too. Well, thanks to that, the scale became smaller than I thought, but it's not bad. It's certain that you're scheming something. Don't you already know? Are you talking about the bugs outside? Crackle. Electricity burst out from Zeus' hand. The small talk was over. Feel free to come. The sky turned purple, the day that sky opened and beings from the outside came inside. Zeus eventually stopped them with his own power. I'll wipe them all out. Kaboom. The electricity that burst from his hand swept over Cronus. The power extending from Cronus' fingertips stopped Zeus' electricity. The electricity that had stopped like a picture for a moment had its direction of power reversed by Cronus' magic power. Give it back. Kaboom. The electricity that swept over Zeus' body in reverse. There was not a big shock. Zeus, who had his own power reversed back at him, did not have a single small wound. Of course, Cronus did not expect Zeus to get hurt by something like this in the first place. You don't know anything about them. Cronus closed his eyes for a moment. Even now, when he closed his eyes like this, he could still hear a voice clearly. I remember you. before he first opened his eyes. When he heard that voice that had no ups and downs, Cronus felt fear and awe at the same time. You are my child. He could not see the face. It was the same even when he opened his eyes. All Cronus saw was the robe that would never come off. A foolish chaos. What he saw outside the tower was an existence that even Cronus' mind could not dare to accept. That's why, even at this moment, it seemed like he would reach out to him if he stretched out his hand. Work for me. A throbbing headache. A lot of time seemed to have passed, but the world had stopped during that time. Kronos, who realized that, continued what he had been saying before. Of course that goes for me as well. He just knows a little more than the people of this world. Kronos looked at his bloodline, who was showing hostility towards him. A bit of strength had returned to his empty eyes. Was it just a whim? Or was it because he thought that he would be held by Zeus for too long at this rate? Will you come with me? Kronos asked Zeus, who was blocking his way. To see what you are fighting against. The end of the first floor. The high black wall with no ceiling in sight was the boundary line that signified the end of the tower. It is a place that players might visit once out of curiosity, but it is usually not a place that they often go to. However, in a rare occurrence in history, countless crowds were swarming at the end of the world. There are a lot of people here. Is it because of the message? How could they not come after seeing that? Right. There was one reason why they gathered here. It was because of the message that was sent to players and rankers scattered throughout the tower at the same time. You can obtain the administrator's authority at the end of the world on the first floor. End of the world. There was probably no player who did not know that it referred to this wall. They all came down to the first floor and headed to the end of the world, avoiding the city where the battle was taking place. They used expensive teleportation grenades like the Sun Chariot, spending the points they had been saving up, and anticipated that the opportunity called the Administrator's Authority would become theirs. However, the place they arrived at was already teeming with players who had the same idea. If I just get the Administrator's Authority, I can turn my life around. How high will my ranking go up? Don't talk nonsense. I fell a while ago. And it was a huge drop. You're always drinking and messing around, so of course you're going to fall. He's introducing himself. It was a conversation between rankers who knew each other. Administrators were beings that even the top-ranking high rankers, who were like their dreams, looked up to. If they could obtain the administrator's authority, it was clear that their ranking would rise by double digits in one go. But where is the administrator's authority? Right, it's a message from the management bureau, so it can't be a lie. There was no way that the management bureau's message could be false. It was a promise that had never changed for hundreds of years to the players who had lived in the tower. So they believed it, that there was an opportunity here that could change their lives. If we wait a little longer, something will happen. Maybe an event-type test. Greed often blinded people. Was that why? Crack. Even though tens of thousands of rankers and players had gathered, none of them noticed. No, they were not even interested. Crack, creak. A small crack began to form on the wall that crossed the end of the world, which no one in the tower had been able to break. No, except for one person. Bingo. Pursing his lips and whistling softly, there was a person looking at the crack in the wall. It was Wu Jin, who had pulled his hat down low so that no one would recognize him and cause him trouble. Did I hit the jackpot? Between the place that Zeus and Odin had headed to and here, Wu Jin had chosen the end of the world. The place with even a slightly higher chance. And if his expectations were correct, he had chosen the place where something much bigger would happen. And now, Wu Jin was confirming it with his own two eyes. It was still just a small crack. Has it started? Now, it really meant that time, was approaching. Chapter 372. More time passed. Those who had moved to gain the administrator's power began to have doubts. Could it be that they had been deceived? In fact, could it be that the administrator's power was something that could not be obtained? As those doubts grew stronger, the crack widened once more. And only then, am I seeing things? What? No, over there. Over there, on the wall, a crack. One by one, people began to discover the tiny crack that had appeared on the wall. Curiosity began to spread rapidly. It was something that should have made them anxious, but their eyes were already blinded. Was this it? You mean the administrator's power? Well, yeah, those guys weren't players, and we didn't know what they were doing. Did the administrator come from outside the tower? They were just trying to keep the power to themselves. Wow, this is totally. The players were furious. They felt betrayed by the thought that the administrators had created the wall and trapped them in order to monopolize the power. They had been right all along. The administrators were the enemies of the players. However, Won Kyung observes the world. Above their heads, fierce eyes appeared. Won Kyung. Is that the heavenly great star? Or, the fact that a message had appeared through the system meant that the skill's effect was beginning to have a direct impact on the players. The players who had gathered near the wall turned their heads one by one to find the opponent who had used Won Kyung. Then, if you don't want to die, protect your own lives from now on. Thud, a man with a hat pulled down over his face walked through the players. The man approached the wall that had begun to crack. Getting out of there won't be as easy as you think. Who the hell is that guy? Is that guy using Won Kyung? Then surely, Fuwoosh, suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew. It wasn't a natural gust of wind. It was a skill that someone had used intentionally to remove the hat from the man's head. At that moment, the hat was blown off and flew into the sky. The moment his face was revealed. Oh, shit, it's Kim Yoo-won. So that guy is after the administrator's power too. But still, he's better than the heavenly great star. Their fighting spirit did not disappear. They intended to fight. Because they thought that Yoo-won was trying to monopolize the administrator's power all by himself. This is going to be a mess. There were many of them, but the level of the players gathered there was not very high. Since they had gathered from the lower floors, the number of rankers was noticeably low. And among them, Kim Yoo-won SSI. A familiar accent rang out. My name is Kim In-gyu, and I'm from the same Korea as you. Black hair, dark beard, and shabby clothes that were uncommon in the tower. He was a man in his mid-20s, about the same age as Yoo-won. His voice seemed to emphasize the words, like you. Kim In-gyu approached Woo-won and said. I really wanted to meet you. I wasn't able to because the opportunity never arose, but. You're from my hometown, aren't you? Yes, it's nice to meet you. I hope you're doing well. Yes. His eyes widened in surprise. He waved his hands in embarrassment. Ah, no, that's not what I meant. Even now, you're strong enough and you're doing well, so shouldn't you share some of that? That's right. Are you trying to keep it all to yourself again? You must have become a high ranker in that short amount of time because that's how you've been living. Won Sung's voice boomed out. Apprehension, jealousy, anger, anxiety. All sorts of negative emotions caused his shoulders to shake and his voice to rise. If it had been a one-on-one, he wouldn't have dared to raise his voice. The first thing that the power of numbers gave was courage. Keeping it all to yourself. Woo-won let out a hollow laugh because he couldn't believe it. He had clearly told them to protect their own lives. Did they hear that as him telling them to give him everything? Well, whatever, if that's what you want. He had said it as a warning, but if this was how they were going to be, then there was nothing he could do. Woo-won's eyes scanned the crowd. Several rankers whose eyes met his flinched in surprise and lowered their gaze. Most of those raising their voices were players from the lower floors. On the other hand, the rankers who had conquered this tower knew. High ranker. And they knew how powerful a high ranker of Woo-won's rank was. Those fools. Did they know what Woo-won's rank is? Should I take this opportunity to run away? No, but I can't give up the administrator's power. Should I just stick to him? Then I might be able to get some of the spoils. It won't matter how many tens of thousands of you there are, you fools. The saying, ignorance is bliss, was perfect for this situation. The ignorant players thought that all rankers were more or less the same. That was because they couldn't climb the tower any further anyway. However, even if you were above the clouds, it didn't mean that the sky looked any lower. Several rankers who realized that the situation wasn't so easy were already preparing to run away. Making a quick buck, power, and rising in status were all important, but wasn't life the most important thing? Woo-won watched those rankers and let out a small sigh. There's no one who will help me. They would find out in time anyway. Just then, something else came up that he needed to take care of. You're here sooner than I thought. Thud, not too far away. He could feel footsteps approaching. Despite the leisurely pace, the distance was closing quickly. Pat, Woo-won raised his head. It wasn't just on the ground. Far away, in the sky. There were others who were following a little late. Odin, who was approaching by lightly bouncing his feet off the sky. Several guild ships were following behind him, mistaking Poseidon for Kronos and following him. Creak. The crack in the wall grew larger and larger. It was impossible to tell how far it would spread, but it seemed that it would not be small. On the day that wall completely collapses. That day came to Yoo-won's mind. The tower will collapse. The puzzle pieces began to fit together. The completed picture was probably a bigger picture than ever before. Swish. Yuan, who had been looking at the wall, turned his head. He had arrived. He's here. Black hair and eyes, a face that was the spitting image of Zeus. Mr. Above the golden horn of the fire ox, the face of Kronos, hidden in the face of Poseidon, was visible. Kronos glanced back. Zeus followed at a moderate distance. And Odin followed him at a distance behind him. Do we have to go any further? Zeus, who had been following him, opened his mouth as if he was bored. It hadn't been that long. This distance was nothing to Kronos, who could accelerate time, or to Zeus, who could travel dozens of miles in a single step. Still, there was one reason why Zeus opened his mouth. It was because the end was beginning to be seen before his eyes. Kronos did not answer. There was no answer coming back, but it didn't matter. Well, the answer was already beginning to appear before his eyes. It seems like everyone's gathered. The players gathered at the end of the world. They had all received a common message and gathered in their places. And among them, Yuan and Kronos met each other from a distance. Roar. Kronos felt a strange feeling in his eyes as he looked at Yuan, who was looking at him from afar. The eyes of a huge ape. In front of the two eyes full of fire, Kronos felt as if he had been thrown naked. He's looking right through me. The moment their eyes met, he knew. He was seeing his true self. No matter how clumsy the disguise or shell in front of the golden horn of the fire ox, it didn't work. Creepy, creepy. He felt creepy, a feeling he had never felt from Zeus or Odin. Kronos felt as if he had become a small herbivore in front of a predator. Thud. Yuan and Kronos began to walk towards each other. People were buzzing at the appearance of Poseidon, but no one dared to intervene in the approach of the two high rankers. No, rather, they distanced themselves a little so as not to get caught in a battle that might happen. Zeus, who was watching them, was the same. Just as Yuan and Kronos met each other up close. It's you. Kronos spoke first. Kim Yuan. At those words, Yuan's brow twitched. Just in case, but of course. He didn't remember himself. Well, he had thought this would happen. If he was the Mr. I know, he wouldn't have done such a thing. It was not yet clear how he had changed so much. The Kronos that Yuan knew was the one who had fought the Outer's head on more than anyone else. Because of that, he had almost used up most of his lifespan, and he had grown old as an old man with a hunched back and hundreds of wrinkles on his face. The Kronos in front of him now, with only a few wrinkles on his face, was a completely different person. What you want is, Yuan folded his greeting. Anyway, if he was a stranger. There was no need to waste time with a long, rambling story. Was that it? Crack. The speed at which the cracks appeared became faster and faster. Now it was so clear that even those who did not have a keen eye could see it. Yuan's lips curled up. You must have used enough points last time. Did you come back this time with a little more hassle instead of an easy way? Twitch. Kronos's eyebrows twitched, but as if he had no intention of showing his feelings, he quickly returned to his original expression and asked. What are you talking about? Kill the administrator, gather the messy middle rankers. Make them fight each other. That way, you can earn points again. I thought it was a well-planned plan. What would have happened if I hadn't noticed it in the middle? The hope of surpassing the administrator would become a spark and turn the entire tower into a sea of fire, and the wall would have collapsed much sooner and with a larger crack than expected. The wall is weakened by the absence of the administrator. Aim for that gap. It's something that can only be done if you can kill the administrator, but you've planned it well in this short amount of time. Kronos's expression didn't change anymore. At some point, he gave up being surprised and quietly closed his eyes. And soon, when he opened his eyes again, he looked at Yuan and opened his mouth. As expected, the most dangerous one is you, Odin, Zeus, and Satan, who arrived late in the distance and was watching this way. In addition to them, several other high rankers like stars had arrived at this place. Nevertheless, Kronos had a hunch. More than a few high rankers, more than any high-ranking ranker. The fact that Yuan in front of him now was the most dangerous enemy. Who thanks to. The reason he was able to come to this place was thanks to the clockwork that Kronos had made. Because he sacrificed himself for everyone. He was able to be here because he was forgotten in everyone's memory and gave up on himself. Well, it doesn't matter. Crack, rumble, the wall, which was quickly cracking, began to crumble. Kronos looked at the black wall behind Yuan and opened his mouth. Anyway, the result wouldn't have been much different. Considering the size of the world, it was just a small flaw. But with just that little flaw. Rumble, rumble. The tower began to shake violently. The world's wall is collapsing. Chapter 373. As Yu-won saw the goat that appeared, he muttered a curse and shouted. The table shook. Harkin and his team members, who were about to start eating, paused. Earthquake. Suddenly, it was too short to be called an earthquake. The intensity was so weak that it would not be felt unless one was a sensitive player. However, some of the rankers could clearly feel it. The vibration started from far away. And so did Harkin. What passed by? The sweat ran down his spine. Even though it was not something he should react so sensitively to, a sense of unease stirred in his chest. As expected, it doesn't seem to be only here. Paladin, who was about to drink soup, looked back at his player kit. It was his habit to spend time searching the kit during meals. At Paladin's words, Harkin was the first to look out. Several articles were being uploaded from various communities on the kit. 28th floor. Is there a player on the 28th floor? It seems like there was an earthquake. Did you only feel the vibration? 28th floor. I felt it too. 31st floor. I'm on the 42nd floor and I felt it too. Me too. 17th floor. It's on the 3rd floor, but I felt it a little hard here. Look at how polite the 3rd floor speech is, lol. What is this? From the 3rd floor to the 42nd floor, and to the 91st floor where they were. It was a vibration that occurred in a chain on several floors. Even if only the 3rd to 91st floors were confirmed now, it meant that the vibration was actually transmitted to all floors. And that meant, it meant that the tower they were standing on was shaking. The wall of the world is collapsing. KRRRRRR. The black wall collapsed. The boundary between the tower and the outside. With its collapse, the tower shook violently. It meant that a great shock had been applied. It was the same on the 1st floor. For a moment, the players sitting down felt as if the ground was caving in or rising. But that was only for a moment. They were startled by the cry that came from beyond the collapsed wall. What is that sound? A cry? Is it a monster? Any player who had experience climbing the tower had experience fighting monsters. No, it was just a difference in experience, but everyone who had acquired the qualification of a player was the same. This was because in order to obtain the qualification of a player, one had to pass the tutorial. And the rankers were at the top of such players. Even such rankers could not remain calm at the cry coming from beyond the collapsed wall. No, rather, what the hell, it's not a simple cry. Something is different. They felt it more clearly. The cry coming from beyond was different from the monsters they had fought so far. It didn't feel like it was simply a stronger monster. It was more fundamental than that. It was a cry that awakened the fear deep in their hearts. On the other hand, Yu-won looked at the cry and the collapsed black wall and was somewhat relieved. Fortunately, it's not that big. Was it because it was a bit short of the original plan? The wall was not as badly damaged as he had feared. If the cracks were this large, there would be a limit to the power of the outer that could come over. As expected, thud, thud, what walked in from beyond the collapsed wall was a small goat. It was a small goat with purple fur. To the naked eye, it looked like nothing special. The goat was small and even looked a little cute. Maybe that's why. The players who were deceived by such an appearance relaxed one by one. What is it? It's just a sheep. Clatter. One by one, the players approached the goat. They thought there would be a wide field beyond the wall. However, this is crazy. This is crazy. Uranus's heart shook. The lightning held in Zeus's hand. Yu-won, who saw the sheep that appeared like that, muttered a curse and shouted. Get away, Warrioric, walk. Purple flames rose between the goats and the players. The players who were approaching the goats were startled and stepped back. What? Fire. Ah, it's hot. The player who was closest was partially caught in the holy fire and cried out in heat. The players who were stepping back to avoid the flames had other thoughts. Is there something wrong with that goat? Could that goat be the administrators? Then, Kim Yu-won stopped them from approaching the goat. Several rankers who noticed this fact activated their mana. And the next moment, they covered their bodies with mana, and some used armor and shields created with skills. 3 rankers jumped into the flames. Perhaps because the range was wide, the holy fire that Yu-won manifested was not powerful enough to take the lives of those with the strength of rankers. That's why they risked their adventure. Wow! The 3 rankers parted the flames and jumped inside. And the place they arrived at after cutting through the flames was. That guy is mine. No, mine, gotcha. As if it had been waiting, there was a goat with its mouth wide open like a Venus flytrap. The goose that lays the golden egg. A divine beast with the power of an administrator. An opportunity to lead them to greater heights. That's what they thought it was. Kwajik. The 3 rankers entered the goat's mouth in an instant. The sound of them being chewed up, bones and all, was not even mixed with screams. Yuan, who saw this first, clicked his tongue. Tisk. No matter how he tried to reach out to save them, if they misunderstood that his hand was going to strangle them, there was nothing he could do. The flames that Yuan created gradually subsided. The goat's figure was revealed like that. What? Where are the rankers? In that guy's mouth. Blood. The 3 rankers who ran towards the goat. The rankers who disappeared and the bloodstains on the goat's lips. It was a situation that even an idiot could understand. The purple-haired goats that entered from the outside of the broken wall had devoured the rankers. What is that thing? Yuan turned his head at the voice coming from behind him. He was about a head taller than Yuan. A calm and gentle voice, and golden hair that shone even in this dark atmosphere. It was Zeus. Shu ni susyang. What? Zeus asked back as if to say what Yuan was talking about. It wasn't because it was the first time he had heard the name. Yuan's voice sounded very unnatural, as if a filter had been put on his speech. And Yuan nodded at Zeus's reaction. Fortunately, you still can't understand what I'm saying. Then speak properly, so that I can understand. There is a goat of the Black Forest with 1,000 young. Me. Was it because it heard its mother's name? The goat cried out towards Yuan's direction. Me, 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 me. The cries gradually increased. All the cries were coming from one goat. And to the cries of the goat, Yuan was convinced. That guy is probably one of those 1,000. Kacha. The goat's mouth opened to an unrealistic size. Inside its mouth, which was several times the size of its body, another goat was spit out, and that goat spit out another goat. From 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4. The number of goats increased rapidly. Me, me, me. The cries of the goats filled the sky. Zeus, who could no longer stand it, gripped the lightning in his hand. That moment. Stop it, Paget. The lightning in Zeus's hand gradually dimmed. The ring that filled Yuan's hand. Uranus's heart shook the lightning that Zeus held in his hand. He could have resisted if he wanted to. But Zeus didn't. He just looked at Wu Yun as if he was asking why. If you attack the unborn cubs, the mother might move. Mother. Wu Yun shook his head. Beyond the goats that were still growing in number. A bright red eye appeared outside the broken wall. Is that it? It definitely seemed dangerous. It was enough to feel its presence across the dimensional gap. Yeah, I'm not sure if he can come in with just a crack that size. Then it doesn't matter, does it? Just in case. Wu Yun shook his head. If that happens, everyone here will die. I didn't know you were such a coward to think about the worst-case scenario. That's how dangerous it is. The Black Forest goat with 1,000 cubs. That was just one of the many names for him. It was hard to find maternal love in a guy with so many cubs. However, the Black Forest goat was strangely attached to its new cubs. That was why Wu Yun had warned Zeus. Just in case. If the Black Forest goat, unable to contain its anger, came through the broken wall, everyone here would be dead. It's not time to face him yet. Fortunately, if the Black Forest goat came over, there would definitely be some problems on the other side as well. If he were to come through a crack of this size, his strength would be greatly reduced, and the waste of points due to overload would be considerable. It would be a situation where neither side would gain anything. That's why Wu Yun waited. Until the Black Forest goat completely closed its eyes. And after a while, swish, beyond the crack in the wall. The Black Forest goat that had been staring at this side closed its hot eyes. It couldn't stare at the rice cake it couldn't eat for the rest of its life. And it was the first and last maternal love of the mother to protect the newborn goats. Me, 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 the cries of the goats that shook the world. The aura of the outer was mixed in that cry. A strange aura completely different from magic power or mana. The numerous goats with the same purple fur looked like a giant monster with hundreds of heads and one body. Swish, thud, what is it? Hey, what's wrong with you? We have to run away. Run away. Players turned and ran away at the appearance of a monster beyond their cognitive range. But that didn't last long. Of the players who made eye contact with the goats, those with weak mental strength lost their minds and collapsed, their eyes rolling back in their heads. Thud. The number of players who lost their minds was about half. Most of them were players from the lower floors. Since most of them were players who stayed close to the first floor so that they could run without any special means of transportation, it was a natural result. Crunch, crunch, bang, the goats began to chew on the players alive. Time to hunt. In the eyes of the hungry guys who had just been born, the players in front of them were nothing more than a delicious dinner. And that was it. Phew, it was the same on this side. Can this fill my stomach? Gurgle. A hungry sound rang out from above his head. Wet maple saliva dripped onto Wu Yun's head. The goats that appeared before him seemed to be quite a delicious dinner in Maple's eyes. The Black Forest goat had lost interest in this side. There was nothing to hold him back anymore. Thud. Wu Yun moved with Maple for a while, leaving Kronos behind. The remaining 0.01% was to satisfy their hunger. Chapter 374. Ma-ah-ah, ma-ah-ah. The bleating of goats resounded in his head. A tall and slender man with short black hair and thin clothing that revealed his ribs looked down at the goats. Thump, thump, his heart pounded to the rhythm of the goats, bleating. Finally, the day had come. The corners of the man's mouth turned up into a smile that refused to go down. Had he ever smiled so much? His expression, which rarely changed even once a century, was more radiant than ever. Satan muttered as he looked at the goats. It's finally begun. Just now, he had met eyes from a completely different dimension on the other side of the collapsed wall. What form did it take? He tried to see, but couldn't tell. To Satan's eyes, it was just hundreds of goats gathering, scattering, and then changing back into one, over and over again. Was it a being with many forms, or was it one form that appeared to be many? Or was he simply bewitched by something? In fact, none of that mattered. All he wanted was for this world to disappear. And to do that. Whoosh! Satan's gaze shifted. Not far away, he could see the guild ships struggling to cope with the appearance of the goats. Crunch! Odin took a step towards the goats. Ever since he had sensed the transcendent being beyond the collapsed wall, a being unlike anything he had ever felt before. Odin could understand why Kronos had gathered so many players and rankers. Were they all just bait? Chomp, chomp, he could see rankers being eaten alive by the goats. The giant guilds resisted the goats. But despite their size, the goats were not easily subdued. Rather, he even saw a goat swallow a ship carrying a medium-sized guild whole. Hundreds of goats. On the other hand, the number of rankers and players gathered here exceeded 10,000. Even if half of them had lost their minds the moment they saw the goats. This is too awful. In an instant, the world on the first floor had turned into a slaughterhouse. In an instant, the world on the first floor turned into a chaotic battlefield. The movements of the mountain goats stopped momentarily, and the players who had been fighting or running away turned their gazes towards Odin. The ground was submerged in water by Cronus, who had possessed Poseidon's body, and unidentified monsters appeared and disappeared at the end of the world. I don't know what that existence outside is. My pride as the king of Asgard didn't allow me to lose so easily. Me, a mountain goat charged towards Odin. Unlike the gentle bleating of a sheep, it opened its mouth wide and lunged at Odin, trying to bite him in one breath. Crunch! The mountain goat's teeth dug into Odin's shoulder. Normally, his shoulder would have been torn off, just like the other rankers. However, not even a scratch appeared on Odin's shoulder. Skin that couldn't be pierced by the mountain goat's teeth. The mountain goat tilted its head in wonder when it had nothing to chew on. And that moment, whoosh, bang, Odin's fist struck the mountain goat's head. Thud, the head shattered into pieces. The broken pieces scattered like snowflakes and sprinkled into the air. Mew, a strange cry came out of the broken head. Even though its head had burst like a balloon, the mountain goat stubbornly clung to life. Groan, Odin's fist tightened, something that would never happen to a normal living being. From the beginning, the mountain goats that appeared before his eyes didn't seem to have their own forms. They're just like slimes. In such cases, Odin knew exactly how to fight. The solution was simpler than he thought. Roar. Odin's palm spread wide. A blue circular magic circle unfolded beneath his palm. As he approached the distorted mountain goat with it. Whoosh, whoosh, dozens of magic circles appeared around the mountain goat. Let's see if you can still live after every part of your body is destroyed. Roar. The dozens of magic circles rubbed against each other and expanded their power. Then, the power amplified dozens, hundreds of times every second, disintegrating the mountain goat's body. A pillar of blue light soared high into the sky as the magic circles swept over the mountain goat. Roar, roar, the pillar of light momentarily illuminated the surroundings, drawing attention. In an instant, the goats' movement stopped, and the gazes of the players who had been fighting or fleeing turned to Odin. Odin, it's Odin. The expressions of the players who had been unaware of Odin's existence until now brightened. He was known as the strongest among the currently active rankers. His presence alone was enough to boost their morale. Whoosh, the blue pillar gradually lost its light. The figure of the goat that had been caught in it disappeared without a trace. You have defeated the young goat of the Black Forest. A message appeared in Odin's mind. Odin's eyes narrowed at the message. The young goat of the Black Forest. The eyes he had seen beyond the wall. It seemed to be the name of the guy who had scattered his young and quickly lost interest. He'll come over to this side someday. Clang, Odin's hand tightened. He thought that maybe it was fortunate that the wall had collapsed at this moment. If it hadn't, he wouldn't have known what was beyond it. Bah, 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 the goats cried out. The death of one of their young made them all cry. Even though not all 1,000 of them had gathered, the hundreds of goats were more imposing than any monster Odin had ever encountered. Tisk, tisk, the goats cried out in unison. In Odin's eyes, they mixed together and appeared as one giant creature. They're getting agitated. Thud, Odin stomped on the ground. Whoosh, a huge magic circle spread out over the sky. Odin began to walk towards the giant goat with hundreds of heads. But at that moment, clack, an unbelievable sight entered Odin's eyes. What the heck is that? Even bigger fangs were devouring the goats. It was the moment when a larger predator than the predators had revealed itself. The predator devours the young goat of the Black Forest. Magic power increases slightly. That's the third one. Clack, clack, the predator that had devoured one of the goats began to move after another prey. The predator that Dana had summoned hunted the goats like a fish in water. One by one, they were all comparable to the foreign beings of a certain rank. The goats, who had filled their bellies with the already prepared dinner, were Amorathanana to fill the predator's belly. Just like that, a Tatit's fourth meal. Magic power has increased by 1. Yuan possible to gain additional stats. These results are not bad. The individual size of each goat was small, but their essence was great. They were the young of the goats of the Black Forest. It took a long time to digest them, and naturally, the digested power was also significant. The problemist had 0.01% of it was not yet filled. Well, it doesn't matter. For now, Idaven wasn't abating to catch this guy seating them to increase his stats. Yuan shook off his impatience. Rather, it is good. He suddenly looked at the collapsed wall. The passage through the young of the goats of the Black Forest came through. It wasn't possible to leave it like that anymore, because I need a little more magic power now. Bah, bah, Yuan looked down at Dana, who was dancing at the bottom of his feet. It wasn't just the predator who had become excited as if it was meat that had come into contact with water. Dana also had. Would it be okay to leave her alone? Yuan escapes a brief lighter ned to the predator. Hote goats. Me, Quaiduduk, the goat struggling and crying out. And the predator who wed on the goat and the other goats who charged at the predator. It was closer to one-sided hunting than fighting. Besides that, I guess it's okay. Yuan looked at Odin, who intertwined himself among the goats. As long as there won't be problem any time for no. After all, Odin, who had later achieved divinity, had the power to survive a fight not with goats, but with their mother. In that case, Dana, bah, eat some more food. Yuan bent down and stroked Dana's head. Because he looked vulnerable compared to the power he possessed, he was somewhat worried. But now he had to stay a little away for a while, because it wasn't just the young of the goats of the Black Forest that had to be wary of no. But, the guy who seemed to say that should leave it to him, pounded his chest. His cute gesture was quite believable. Yuan thought there was no more need to worry and got up from his seat. Odin and Dana, those two were reliable enough. I'll leave the goats to them. Flash, two colors met in Yuan's eyes. To the direction he turned his head. Should I go and consult them? Rumble, a golden thunderbolt was seen falling to the ground. Rumble, Cronus caught the lightning that fell below. It felt like his hands were burning. No matter how much he stopped time, he couldn't catch all the lightning bolts. It was obvious. Crackle, crackle, Zeus's lightning bolts weren't just one. What did you summon? Dozens of lightning bolts were aimed. Zeus asked as if he was demanding an answer. Where did those things even come from? You wouldn't know even if I told you. That voice again. If it was before, he wouldn't have believed it, but now, he couldn't do that. I'm the S child. Yuan's answer was heard as if it was filtered and unclear. There was no way it could be considered a voice coming out of a mouth. As if the world rejected the word, it scattered in the middle without reaching Zeus's ears. It was probably the same for everything outside. In the end, I won't be able to know anything. It was frustrating, but there was nothing he could do. He wasn't the type to give up easily, but there was no need to go down a difficult path when there was an easier one. Eventually, Zeus came back down to the ground. And at that moment, crackle, sizzle, dozens of lightning bolts that were floating in the sky disappeared. You can hear it, right? Thud. As soon as he finished speaking, someone walked between Zeus and Cronus. Of course, it was Yuan. Burning with his heavenly demon eyes, Yuan turned his back on Zeus and looked at Cronus. He wondered if Zeus wouldn't give in. But fortunately, it seemed that Zeus didn't have much attachment to Cronus anymore. Instead, then I'll go over there. Whoosh, Zeus headed to where the collapsed wall and goats were. Cronus made a strange expression. Yuan had come looking for him. He thought he would be fighting the goats. Is there something you need from me? Yuan, who was left alone with Cronus. Aren't you curious? From the start, he threw a direct hit towards Cronus's chest. The reason why you were banished from this world. Chapter 375. He didn't remember when it started. He just thought it was after he had Zeus and his other children, based on his expectations. He had been banished from the world he lived in, and he wandered around the outside of the world, not knowing what he had become. You have been abandoned. When he was banished from the world like that. Swish, someone's hand grabbed Cronus. You fool, why do you look back at the world that abandoned you? The foolish chaos. No, in the world where Cronus had been banished to, it was called something else. Nitu, a name that he couldn't recognize or speak. Cronus followed the outstretched hand and became his. But now, the guy in front of him, who he was seeing for the first time in his life, was talking as if he knew everything about him. Why was I abandoned in this world? Cronus's expression became ferocious. Do you know, resentment and anger, various other complex thoughts were conveyed through Cronus's eyes. His face was the same, and his abilities were the same. The only difference was that he could feel Outer's energy from Cronus in addition to his magic power. That meant, he hasn't completely crossed over yet. It was a blessing in disguise. If he had been completely assimilated into the other side like the foolish chaos or the black forest goat with 1,000 young, he wouldn't have been able to have a conversation like this. Answer me. Roar, clack. As Cronus gathered his energy, Yuan felt the time flowing around him distort. The power with an unclear form definitely existed. Fire that couldn't be held in your hand, or gravity, were powers like that. However, time was a power that belonged to an even higher dimension. In this tower, Cronus was the only one who could use that power. That power was binding Yuan's body so that he couldn't move. Wangkunjung, resists, clock of Cronus. Gigantification, resists, clock of Cronus. Rumble, clack, Yuan's skills began to resist Cronus's power. Even if they were having a conversation, it was meaningless to do it in this state. A conversation should be had when both parties were on equal footing. And to do that, he had to resist this power. Chomp, chomp, Uranus's heart resists Chronos' clock. Resistance successful. Crackle, his fingers began to move little by little. It was Uranus's heart's cold fingers. The moment Yuan's arm was raised. Kaboom, the magic power emitted through the ring swept through Chronos' body. Crackle, crackle, the ground swept by the electric shock turned black. Only when Chronos crossed his arms to block the electric shock was Yuan able to find complete freedom. Chronos was pushed back by the force of the electric shock. There seemed to be no physical wounds, but Chronos was quite surprised that his skill had been disrupted. Didn't you want to talk? Thud, Yuan took a step as Chronos was pushed back. You didn't just want to fight. It's easier to subdue you first to get you to talk. There is no moment when people are as honest as when they are facing death. Chronos believed so. That was why he intended to subdue Yuan first and make him talk. About how he knew him and why he had been abandoned by this world. However, there's no need to go through the trouble of talking. Yuan had no intention of having a long conversation with Chronos. Instead, I'll show you. Flash, Yuan's two pupils burned fiercely. Wan Jiamzhang resonates with Chronos' clock. Sharing the vision. Wan Jiamzhang, an all-powerful eye that pierces through truth and falsehood, grasping the essence. And in that eye, there was also a power like this. Swish, swish, the world that Yuan and Chronos saw began to change. The eyes of the two who had begun to resonate saw a different landscape, separated from the world. Long ago, Yuan had shown a similar memory to Sun Ogong's clone. At that time, it was a phenomenon that Sun Ogong's clone and Yuan had manifested together, but now. I can do it alone. Su, swoosh, the surrounding scenery disappeared without a trace, and a new scenery appeared. The rankers fighting the goats not far away. Zeus, who had begun to cast lightning bolts. Odin, who grabbed the goat's head and swung his fist with the other hand. Everything disappeared. Everything disappeared. Not everything was different, however. What are you trying to show me? Chronos' head snapped up. He hadn't resisted Uran's skill. He could have, if he wanted to, but he was more curious about the why than he was interested in resisting. Just like that, the moment Kronos asked his question. Thud, a man with a crooked back appeared before him. No matter how many times I look at that damn sky, it still disgusts me. His eyes were droopy, as if he had just woken up from a deep sleep. Judging from his hunched back and the wrinkles on his face, he looked quite old. It was his first time seeing the man, but he didn't feel like a stranger. Of course not. Kronos had imagined that face for a long, long time. Am I you? His own appearance, aged and worn from using too much time. It was exactly the same as the image he had imagined. It can't be helped, at least not until the outer completely disappears. It's still here, Kronos asked after spotting Urin, who was sitting at the entrance of the barracks. The future Urin, whose hair had grown thin, waved his bandaged arm. As you can see, my arm is like this. His arm was injured from fighting the outer. More than half of his arm had become necrotic, making it impossible to use in battle. Is there a way to heal it? There might be. That's tough. Should I heal it for you? Sure. If there's no other way, then that's all we can do. Kronos' ability was time, a power that was always present, everywhere, but perhaps because of that, it didn't feel like much of a power. However, depending on how it was used, time could be a greater power than any medical ability. After all, if you turned the injured area back to the past, it would naturally return to its original state. But Urin didn't do that. If you age any more there, it'll be unpleasant to look at, mister. Hee, you worry too much. It's fine, I won't age any more here. If you want to be called Grandpa, then go ahead. That was because he knew that the more Kronos used his power, the older he would become. It wasn't just his appearance that would age. He would also become physically weaker, and he would gradually die. Should I give you a spoiler? Urin raised his arm. In the end, my arm was healed. You healed it. You used my life to heal yourself. Nonsense, Kronos frowned. Certainly, the present Yuan was completely different from then. To be exact, that's what happened in the future. The future. Clang. One of the puzzles that had been missing in Kronos' mind fell into place. No, it seemed to make more sense. How the player known as Kim Yuankameto exist. I sent you here. Yes, I guess we were a lot closer than I thought. You're even having this kind of chit chat with me. The present and future Yuan wasted time engaging in unimportant banter. A world experiencing near destruction, the companionship and bond for Med in that world were solid based on his current appearance alone. However, so, what is the point of that? Kronos didn't care about any of that. Because we were friends in the future, you're telling me to show you mercy. The future hadn't happened yet. It wasn't very important to Kronos, who was living in the present. What did you guys do all this time while I was like this? Did you just sit around and didn't anything? Crash. Kronos recalled what they had experienced outside of that wall. It was a time when Asikon felt like a decades or centuries. Kronos spent an eternity buried within countless foreign bodies, waiting for someone. In the end, Kronos was greeted by foolish chaos. That's why I couldn't understand the situation even more. He implied I didn't care about future connections that never existed. In the end, it was the being outside who had come to savor him. But that wasn't what Yuan was trying to say. I'm not asking you to blame anyone. What? It was your choice. Swish. The scenery around the two began to change. The sky turned purple. An indistinct figure slumped on the ground and Yuan and Kronos surrounded it. And several colleagues. It was the last day of the future that Yuan remembered. I was the memory of that day when Kronos sacrificed himself. Crunch. The predator's teeth bit into another goat. Bah! The goat screamed. At some point, the goats had stopped attacking the predators and were instead running away. Bah! Bah! In the middle of the predators and goats, a young child danced as if possessed. Phew! Odin laughed in vain as he watched the child. I don't know where such a guy came from, but it was clear that the predators he breathed in were of great help to the goats. Let's think of it as an ally for now. In the meantime, Odin's attention was briefly drawn to Danpung. Me. Another goat devoured Odin's body. Wung. Zer. Odin's elbow struck the goat's head. Then the goat's body burst like a balloon and flew towards the distant collapsed wall. Thud. Quad. The goat that Odin blew away was quite large. It seemed that he had eaten other players and gained a lot of weight. Odin looked around, taking his attention away from the goat. Quirung. Kung. Kugugugu. A golden rain of lightning began to fall from the sky. Zeus had joined the battlefield. In addition, several other guilds had begun to fight the goats. And the help of predators. Somehow it seems to be sorted out. When the goats first appeared, it seemed like something much bigger was going to happen. But it was fortunate. Thanks to Kronos calling in so many rankers, it was possible to prevent the goats that had flowed in from outside from scattering all over the tower. I was too greedy. If only Zeus or one of them hadn't been here, the outcome might have been different. Anyway, Odin was convinced of victory in this battle. But, Maya, it was a completely different sound from the crying I had heard so far. Goosebumps broke out on my body instantly. It wasn't just because my body and ears couldn't properly take in what the crying was. It was because of the direction of the sound. No way. Hoping not, Odin looked over the still collapsed wall. And that moment, Odin could see it clearly. Definitely the one who had lost interest in me. The gaze of the mother who led the 1,000 young was directed back this way. Chapter 376. Among the 20 or so people. Familiar faces were having a conversation. Is this really the end? I didn't expect this kind of farewell. That's right, I thought it would end one way or another. Heracles, the hero of Olympus known as the Giant Slayer. Sun Wukong, the high ranker with the lofty title of Heavenly Great Sage and a traitor to the heavens. Brunhild, the leader of the Valkyries who led the war of the Asgard Guild. In addition to them, there were all the high rankers known by name. What do you mean, perish? It's not over yet. While everyone was despairing, there was only one person who still had courage. Heavenly Great Sage. Heracles replied to his words as his whole body was wounded and scarred. You speak well for someone who was dying. Heracles wasn't in good shape either. He also had an arm torn off and his face was pale. What on earth had happened? Cronus' gaze turned to the old man sitting on one side with his eyes closed. His own appearance, which was clearly older than before. While Sun Wukong and Heracles were chattering, being pessimistic, and fighting each other with determination, his future self was sitting with his eyes closed, watching them. As if waiting for something. Thud, that was when Yuan appeared with an exhausted look. Swish, thud. A pure white mass appeared from somewhere. The gazes of Sun Wukong and Heracles, who had been growling at each other, turned to Yuan. You're back. I thought you were dead. Yuan, who sat down on the chair with difficulty, bowed his head. When he spoke of the deaths of his other companions, the room became solemn. And right after that, who was this guy? Ignorant Chaos. What? Cronus heard an unbelievable conversation. He's dead. It was unbelievable. Ignorant Chaos. Cronus had seen his essence closer than anyone else. It was difficult to imagine him dying, let alone winning. And everyone else thought the same. That was when the future Cronus, who had been sitting in a corner with his eyes closed, stood up. We can't win. Not now. The clockwork in Cronus' hand. He answered Yuan, who was asking for another way with a negative look. Go back to the old world line. And start over. Is that really possible? It was just a theory. It was impossible. At least the current Cronus was convinced of it. Of course, it wasn't that there was no way at all. I couldn't have done it alone. Mimir and Odin helped me. If it's not one person, then 2 people. If 2 people can't do it, then 3 people can. Time was much more complex and delicate than one might think, so it was almost impossible for one person to intervene in another timeline with their own power. But even so, it was hard to believe that he, who had already grown old and decrepit, had the ability to do so. Surely, it was from then on. In Cronus' head, the next scene began to be anticipated. As expected, in the world line you go back to, I'll probably be gone. That's the only way to reverse time and distort the world line, and it's a fair price. This was the only way. To squeeze out the remaining strength and pay the price for intervening in another timeline. That's a lie. It was hard to believe. That ignorant Chaos was dead. That he had made this choice for them. It was a story that was still too hard to believe at this short moment. Yuan sighed as he looked at Cronus, who denied what he had seen. He had thought this would happen. Yuan reached into his inventory. For a long time, it was an item that had been stuck in the inventory. Lately, it seemed to be taken out often. Click. A completely broken watch that was still moving without stopping. Watch spring. The moment he discovered it, Kronos couldn't help but believe it. As if possessed by something, Kronos reached out to the watch spring. That's how it is to hold the watch spring again. Click, click. Wah! Kronos' head was filled with his memories remaining in the watch spring like a strong wave. In order to intervene in the laws of the tower using the watch spring, you have to endure excessive penalties. If that happens, maybe I'll end up in the same situation as them. Expulsion from the tower, whether the result would be death or the same fate as those foreign gods. Kronos had been determined for quite a while. It was real. Anyway, it was nothing more than a piece of scrap metal with little magic power left after its use. Kronos could feel his own magic power and that of Odin and Mimir in it. An item from his future self. There was no other evidence that gave strength to Yuan's words as much as that. Tisk, tisk. Soon after, the scenery that the two of them saw through the one of Jin Jing disappeared, and the original world appeared. Kronos, who came from the past, had a blank look on his face. Swish, thud, Yuan took back the watch spring on Kronos' hand. Putting it back in his inventory, Yuan continued speaking. Twisting the world line and intervening in another world line is not the same as simply intervening in the lower floors. That's something that you, Mimir, and Odin know best among us. The three of them were the ones who created the watch spring in the first place. Of course, they would know best about its side effects. And among them, in particular, especially you. Kronos was the one who contributed the most to operating the watch spring. The process of completing the watch spring and using it was too hasty. That's why Yuan couldn't think properly about what would happen to Kronos by using it. That's why Yuan wanted to know. Let me ask you one thing, mister. Did you really not know that this would happen? Did Kronos really expect this outcome? As the price for breaking the laws of the tower, his existence would disappear, he would be expelled from the tower and thrown out of the world line. Did he really not know that he would be forgotten in everyone's memories? The Kronos before his eyes was different from the Kronos that Yuan knew. But, well, Yuan didn't think he wouldn't have expected this outcome when he first conceived the watch spring with Odin. Think about it slowly. Swish. No more persuasion was needed. Yuan brushed past Kronos and patted his shoulder. What you really wanted. Kronos, who was left alone, seemed to be lost in deep thought. Where on earth did things go wrong? Was it really his own choice that led him to become like this? And, where should he be from now on? It must be confusing. Before he first met Kronos, Yuan intended to deal with him boldly if he belonged completely to the outside. That's why he contacted Zeus first, and as a last resort, he even thought of using him as prey for the predator. However, Kronos was now in an intermediate state where he didn't belong anywhere. That's why there was still a possibility that he could come back. I can only do this much. From now on, it depended on Kronos' choice. Just like that, the moment Yuan passed Kronos. Maya. Far away, a type of cry that shouldn't be heard was heard. And the moment he heard it, screech, Yuan's head started aching as if it was about to break. Crazy. Buzz, buzz, I really hoped this wouldn't happen. Yuan turned his head and saw the far distance, beyond the broken wall. This is bad. Beyond the wall, the mother of the mountain goats cried. Thud, ghoul, the rankers who were fighting the mountain goats collapsed one by one and lost consciousness. Why all of a sudden? Swish, despite the difference in timing, most of them seemed to lose consciousness. Ma, the mountain goats turned their bodies. The young goats reacted to the mother's cry. The rankers who were still conscious muttered as they watched the mountain goats return to where they came from. Escaping are they? Yeah, you bastards. Where? Their bodies trembled, but their mouths were alive. The rankers, whose lives had been on the line just a moment ago, sighed in relief that they were alive and mourned the deaths of their comrades. But that was only for a moment. There's a mountain beyond the mountain. Agni, the high ranker of Veda, pushed back his messy hair from the fight with the mountain goats. Ma, the mountain goats were jumping towards the wall. At the sound of the mother goat's cry, Agni almost lost consciousness. The cry had that much power. He had heard it with his ears, but he couldn't understand or hear it properly. The number of rankers who had lost consciousness from the cry alone had exceeded 1,000. To think that there was a being that could defeat 1,000 rankers just by crying. He had never dared to think that such a thing existed. Ma, Odin grabbed the horn of one of the mountain goats. The mountain goat wanted to go outside with it, but it couldn't because of Odin's fierce grip. Of course, Odin wasn't interested in the goat he had already caught. Odin's interest had always been in the being outside, from the beginning until now. Is it coming? A being greater and more powerful than all these mountain goats combined. As long as it was there, it was hard to say that this fight was over. That was why, until now, Odin had not used Gingnir. However, he could no longer spare Gingnir. Odin held Gingnir in one hand. He prepared his spear so that he could activate it at any time and looked at the backs of the mountain goats as they moved away. And so did Zeus. What happened to father? Thud. Zeus asked Yuan, who was approaching from behind. Yuan looked at the great mother who was looking at them from outside, just like Zeus. The story is almost over. Now it's up to him to choose. Is that so? He called him father, but it was only recently that Zeus had remembered Kronos. Even that was only a fragmentary memory, and the father-son relationship hadn't come to life yet. Instead, Zeus's interest was somewhere else entirely. Then all that's left is that guy. Zeus had left Kronos to take care of the mountain goats. But he too had been focused on the black goat in the Black Forest for quite some time now. It had been quite some time since the guy started glaring at them. However, it was a completely different thing to simply glare and to start influencing them with cries. We have to keep it out if possible. Ma, the cry came closer. You hadn't planned to face this guy. It'll be the end if it comes in. Squirm. The black goat of the Black Forest began to reveal itself through a crack that was too small for its size. Chapter 377. No matter how many times he heard it, the cry sent chills down his spine. Yuan clearly remembered the first time he had encountered the owner of that cry. It was unforgettable, the goat of the dark forest with 1,000 young. Oh, I know him as the black goat of the wind. I am the mother of all things. There were countless names for the creature. They were aliases that those who could not bear its name had come up with upon seeing it. Among them, Yuan remembered the creature as the goat of the dark forest with 1,000 young. That was because there were always 1,000 mountain goats around the goat that lived in the dark forest. And on the day he clashed with it, boom, go for now. Odin sent the other comrades away and stood alone to block it. A sight of Gu Ukakusei, determination to die. Along with the sight of Odin's back, Yuan remembered the goat of the dark forest that even his broad back could not hide. A god from another world in the form of a giant goat that trampled countless foreign gods that could be considered allies. An outer god, Odin threw Gungnir with all his might at the creature. Kaboom! Yuan hurriedly shook his head. He had to stop thinking about the past. For now, the top priority was to prevent that creature from coming inside. Ma, the mother's cry came closer. Through the wall, the goat of the dark forest extended its leg toward them. At this rate, it really might come over. Swish! Yuan was the first to take out the spear from his inventory and gripped it. Let's push that creature back for now. An item he had obtained after passing the administrator's test. An item comparable to Odin's Gungnir, Near, is activating. Kaboom! A violent magical power began to pour out of the spear in his hand. Perhaps it was because it was the first time he had seen Nir's activation at such close range, but Zeus showed quite a surprised reaction. Pearls before swine. No matter how much his magical power increased and how much stronger he became, Yuan was still not very impressive in the eyes of Zeus, who had achieved godhood. The reason he thought highly of Yuan was because he had always done things that were much more difficult than his own abilities. However, even Zeus could not help but acknowledge Nir. Stop talking nonsense and prepare yourself to. Whoosh! The sight of the rankers gathered in Yuan's field of vision came into view. Then, the next moment, attack all at once when I give the signal. Yuan's voice was transmitted directly into their heads. And that included Zeus, who was right next to him. To attack a creature that hasn't even fully revealed itself. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Lightning bolts formed in Zeus's hands. Unlike the other lightning bolts he had created so far, it was a single, highly compressed spear. Good to be reasonable, high rankers who became somewhat prideful once they gained some confidence in their abilities. It was natural. The process of becoming a ranker was difficult, and the path to becoming a high ranker was so difficult that even that felt like a bed of roses. That was why it was more natural than strange for them to be overconfident in their abilities after overcoming such a path. However, Zeus was not like that. He was more objective and rational than anyone else. And perhaps that was his greatest virtue that had created Olympus. And one more person, kaboom, Gungnir in Odin's hand began to activate. The other rankers were the same. I don't know what's going on. We just have to block that thing, right? Who's going to give the signal? Crackle, crackle, screech, whung. Thousands of rankers began to prepare their skills. They gathered all their magical power and prepared for a single attack. May, rumble, rumble, the purple-furred leg began to penetrate the wall. Just a few minutes. In those few minutes, the Black Forest goat completely turned the sky purple. After a while, the Black Forest goat with 1,000 young, desires to reveal itself. The signal that everyone was thinking the same thing rang out. Now, Odin shouted, get out of here, monster. I don't know what's going on, but for now. Let's start with that guy. Bang, clang, ka-boom. Numerous rankers' skills were launched towards the Black Forest goat. Odin's Gingnir was fully charged, and Zeus's giant spear painted the sky gold. And finally, Nir shot out of Eugene's hand as well. At that moment, swish, come at me, a black shadow appeared in front of Eugene's eyes. Kaboom, clang, clang, the guy caught the Nir that Eugene had thrown with his bare hands. However, he wasn't able to block it completely, so he was pushed back. That wasn't all. Bang, the hand that had blocked Nir was torn to shreds and exploded. Eugene frowned as he looked at the tall man who seemed surprised by the power that was stronger than he had expected. Satan, he had thought that he would move soon, but he didn't think it would be now. Satan, whose hand had exploded, staggered for a moment. It seemed that he had marked Eugene as his prey on this battlefield. While Satan was blocking Eugene, crackle, the other ranker's skills accurately reached the Black Forest Goat. Roar, a storm-like wave of magic power rushed in. The Black Forest Goat, who had been trying to get inside the tower from outside, was briefly covered by the storm and explosion of magic power. Meanwhile, Eugene looked at Satan, whose one arm had become rags. Is your goal to let that guy in? He had been holding back until now. As someone who hated the tower and wished for its destruction, Satan's goal was obvious. The beings outside the tower, including the Black Forest Goat, were a powerful card that could fulfill his wish. Thud, thud, blood dripped from his broken arm. Satan looked down at his arm for a moment before replying. Don't interfere. Who's interfering? He wanted to get past this guy as quickly as possible and focus on the other side. He lost an arm, but is it possible? The reason he had been able to blow off Satan's arm was because he had enough time to activate Nir. And it was because the guy had unreasonable to do flown his body to block it. On the other hand, he had another thought. He had to say that Satan's body was amazing to have survived with just one arm blown off. Eugene glanced in the direction where Kronos was. Had he still not made a choice? Or was he trying to make a different choice than Eugene expected? The huge explosion of magic power that had occurred once gradually subsided. As the cloud of dust and remnants of magic power faded, the collapsed wall slowly revealed itself. In addition, Rumble, the Black Forest Goat was still stubbornly crawling through the cracks in the collapsed wall. Its cry was much clearer than before. In addition, the rankers who were close enough to see through the crack in the leg that had come out were able to see something horrible. Oh, on its leg, goats, me. The heads and horns of the goats that they had been fighting to the death just a moment ago were attached to its leg. It looked like 1,000 goats combined into one. Every moment, its form changed visibly. From the leg of a giant goat, it transformed into a form where 1,000 goats were jumbled together, and then again into the leg of a sheep covered in purple fur. Wriggle, the leg that had paused for a moment from the attacks of the rankers began to crackle again. Beyond that, the gaze of the goat that had put one leg inside the tower intensified. And the moment they met that gaze up close, the destruction of the world. How did I get caught up in a fight like this? Agni and Kubera felt their minds growing pleasantly distant. If they hadn't momentarily focused and held on tightly to their consciousness, their legs might have given out. That was the case even for the two high rankers, so what about the others? Only then did they realize. The moment that thing came inside, it would become a fight that they could never win. As a single wound the end. With each moment, a small wound appeared on the leg that was constantly changing form. It was probably where Gingnir and Zeus's spear had hit. Don't stop, Quirang, a voice that woke up the rankers who had fallen into despair. The gazes of Yuan and Satan turned towards the voice that had changed the atmosphere. Kukung, Kurur, Zeus rose into the sky, creating countless bolts of lightning and wrapping them around his body. He shouted as he rode the clouds. Block its entry, I'll take the lead. Swish, Zeus grabbed one of the dozens of bolts of lightning floating around him in his hand. Follow me, bang, he threw the spear with all his might. The sound of thunder reverberated across the ground. Thanks to Zeus's power, the morale of the rankers who had fallen to the ground rose little by little. As expected, the one who had been a king was different. Zeus wasn't just strong, he knew how to control the morale of the battlefield. From now on, it's a race against time. He had no choice but to leave the situation outside to Zeus for now. It seemed like this was the first time he had such a difficult fight since entering the tower. Yuan took a step towards Satan, who was blocking his view. And right after, the power of a giant fills your body. Full body gigantification is activated. Fire Eyes Golden Body is activated. Sensory Territory is. Sacred Fire is. Yuan activated all the skills he had. There's no time. Waruk, Pgggggg, Yuan began his fight with Satan, wrapping his body in all sorts of attribute magic. Come in. Bang, querang, quau, countless skills were unleashed, and Zeus threw dozens of bolts of lightning in succession. Not far away, the fight between Yuan and Satan began. It seemed that Satan had targeted Yuan. Odin looked at Gungnir, which had returned to his hand. Peace must have lasted too long. Even to him, it felt like his skills had gotten rusty. It wasn't just a matter of throwing the spear, but he also felt that his own mindset going into the fight had gotten soft. Rank 2. Apart from the Management Bureau's empty recognition of the number 1 ranker who didn't do any real activities, the name, Odin could be said to be the greatest in this tower. Odin knew that fact better than anyone. After rising to that high position, he realized that it had been a long time since he had a proper fight. Swish, Odin put strength into Gungnir, which he held in his hand. However, he didn't plan on throwing it anymore. He was done throwing spears. Instead, thud, Odin began to walk towards the Black Forest's goat that was squeezing through the crack. It was time for a head-on confrontation. Chapter 378. Bam, Zeus's lightning struck the Black Forest goat. Its legs wobbled for a bit, then it started to advance again. Block it, damn it, how tough is that thing? Use your feet to kick it while you're talking. Boom, wham. Tens of thousands of skills were fired off in succession. Zeus, who had fired off dozens of powerful lightning bolts, muttered as sweat dripped down his forehead. What a pest. Crack, Zeus prepared his next spear. Rather than firing off multiple shots, a single, powerful shot was much more effective at blocking the creature. Zeus gathered magic power in his hand and imagined it the largest and most powerful spear he could create. I need a bigger spear. Crack, crack, crack. Zeus's position was a long-range attacker. He was so strong that he could fight in any type of battle, regardless of his position, but ever since he started climbing the tower with the 3 gods, he had become proficient at throwing spears. Zeus's spears were more powerful than anyone else's. He didn't even need to hit the target. Zeus's spears had such a wide range of power that they could wipe out everything in sight. But now, a piercing point. Crack, crack, crack. The tip of the spear sharpened in his hand. I need a sharp spear. In order to pierce that tough hide, he needed a completely different type of spear than he had ever created before. Compression and more compression. Sharpness was the ability he needed most right now. And so, the spear was created in Zeus's hand. Get out of the way. Boom. Heavy footsteps passed by him. Quote. It was as if a giant mountain was walking by itself. Even though he was about the same height and shoulders, Zeus felt like he was as big as a giant. Odin, the king of Asgard and the strongest person in this tower. He started to approach the Black Forest goat. Is he going to block it up close? Zeus's gaze turned to the Black Forest goat, which had its face half submerged. Even now, the creature was changing its appearance every second. It was hard to even see it with his eyes, and most rankers couldn't even look at it straight on. All they could do was fire off skills from afar. Of course, they wouldn't even think of approaching it. And for different reasons, the same went for Zeus. There was no reason to approach it when he could throw spears from afar. But, boom, Odin approached the cracked wall. As he approached, Odin looked up at the Black Forest goat. Meow, the creature was tearing the crack even wider with its face half submerged. It seemed that the wall was so strong that even this creature couldn't easily break through it. I don't know what kind of world is outside. Boom, whir. Above Odin's head, dozens of giant magic circles made up of complex formulas appeared. Go back to your world. Boom, boom, whir. The magic circle, which had been growing in size to cover the sky, entered Odin's palm. The magic circle, which had shrunk to the size of his palm, grew in layers. Huff, thump, thump, muscles bulging with magic power as if he was using gigantification. It was one of dozens of magics embedded in Odin's arm. Clatter, clatter, dozens of magics intersected with each other in constantly circulated power. The black goat cried out once more as the head-on confrontation began. Me, boom, the sound of the cry. Odin's arm began to push the Black Forest goat, which was tearing through the crack, back out. It's being pushed back. Alone, against that. He seemed like a guy who would never die no matter what you did to him. No, forget about killing him, even blocking him from entering through the crack felt difficult. And yet, Odin was pushing back the black goat of the Black Forest with both his arms. Crackle, the lightning in Zeus's hand was gradually fading. So that's why he didn't throw Gungnir and came out himself. It seemed that Odin had chosen to push the guy back rather than kill him. He seems to be weaker than his reputation. Whoosh, whoosh. Magic circles that kept on repeating creation and destruction in Odin's hand. Odin and the black goat of the Black Forest were facing each other and had started a power struggle. It seems that he can do more than just throw a spear. Odin was one of the few high rankers acknowledged by Zeus. He was the one who had established a kingdom called Asgard in the lawless and chaotic tower and established order. Odin hadn't reached the second rank just because of Gungnir. Gungnir was merely an item that symbolized Odin's power. What was truly strong was Odin himself. Let's leave that side alone for now. Zeus turned his body. It was hard to throw a spear from this side while being stuck close like that. Instead, Zeus decided to take care of something that had been bothering him since before. I should get rid of this annoying nuisance first. Swish! A dark hand reached out for Yuan's nape. The hand approached quietly and quickly, with the power to pierce even adamantium. Satan, who had disappeared for a moment, appeared on the opposite side of Yuan. Stab, Skywalk, is activated. Movement speed increases by 100% for 5 seconds. Yuan's body jumped up as if it had been shot up. Mobility using Hermes footwork, Satan turned his body in the empty air, swinging his empty hand. And at that moment, crackle, boom, Yuan's sword, imbued with electricity and flames at the same time, pierced Satan's chest. Screech, a sound like a blunt object hitting hard steel. Yuan frowned at the sensation transmitted to his hand through the sword. The feeling of being cut was very slight. Creak. Satan's body was pushed out. He looked down at his chest. Blood was flowing out of the shallow wound. If it were just a battle of strength against strength, he wouldn't have been pushed back that much. Rumble. Yuan had many skills. Those eyes are annoying. Since the fight had started, Satan had never been able to catch Yuan properly. Mobility through Hermes footwork, dynamic vision using fire eyes and golden body, and even reflexes through sensory zone. It wasn't easy for Satan to fight Yuan in close combat. Should I just break your body? Yuan looked at the several wounds on Satan's body. They were all marks that he had cut with his sword. Among them, there were some wounds that were more accurately described as scratches rather than cuts. This was the first time he had seen such a ridiculously strong body. If we're just looking at the defense of his body, it's even better than Heracles. Just how high were his vitality stats? Apart from Nier, there had been no attack that had left a proper wound on Satan's body. Thanks to fire eyes and golden body, he could fight Satan to some extent, but Satan was ranked 7th, so he was a troublesome opponent for the current Yuan. Should I use Divine Flame to strike a stronger blow? A long-term battle using dark attributes? Or use Susanoo as a shield and wait for Nier to activate? As Yuan was thinking about the battle with Satan that would follow. Flutter. 2 bat-like wings spread out on Satan's back. Roar. At the same time, dark energy began to spread around. Hiss. Instantly, Eugene's arm, which covered his face, turned black and burned. It was the start of corrosion caused by the dark attribute magic power. Dark darkness covered his vision as Satan spread his wings. Eugene stared at it, and that moment, screech. The cry of a snake rang in his ears. Giant's power resides in your left arm. Rumble. Eugene threw a punch with perfect timing. Bang. Tingling, tingling. The impact from the punch he threw was transmitted all the way to his arm. No matter how much he used his giant transformation, it seemed that it was still too much to face a top ranker in the 7th place head-on. However, click, click, click. Unbeknownst to him, Eugene had not clashed fists with Satan. It's probably going to sting quite a bit. A bolt of lightning appeared between Eugene and Satan. Rumble. The moment it made a loud noise. Kya. Satan's body flashed with a golden light. Eugene laughed as he watched Satan writhe in agony. I told you it would sting. Eugene shook his head as he scattered the electricity he was holding in his hand. Thud. Zeus approached Eugene. Zeus, who had just left Kronos to Eugene, showed interest in Satan this time. Are you having trouble with that guy? Even if you didn't help, I would have done fine. If Satan had both of his arms intact, it would have been a different story, but with only one arm, there was a way to deal with him. Anyway, Eugene had an item called Nier that could pierce Satan's body. Of course, Zeus didn't believe Eugene. In his eyes, Eugene seemed to have been struggling until just now. Really? If so, I should have just left you alone. Why did you suddenly come this way? That thing called the Capricorn of the Black Forest is being blocked by Odin for now. Odin. Eugene, who had been fighting Satan without rest and focusing all his nerves and attention on him, discovered Odin fighting the Capricorn of the Black Forest far away. That moment, Eugene suddenly remembered something that happened a long time ago. Go for now. The sight of Odin turning his back on them while blocking the Capricorn of the Black Forest. What happened back then overlapped with this moment. Do you care? Eugene stared at him without saying anything for a while, so Zeus asked. Was this situation also within your expectations? Eugene shook his head. He had expected everything else. But even Eugene didn't think that the Capricorn of the Black Forest would try to force its way through that narrow crack. That was because it was too risky for them as well. Is there a way to block it? Or not? Currently, Odin was using dozens of magic spells and sacrificing his body to block the Capricorn of the Black Forest. But that was only to buy time. It wasn't a fundamental solution. There is. So there isn't. I'm not sure. It's only conditional. It was the first time Eugene had given such an uncertain answer. It also meant that the situation was not good. Zeus pondered for a moment and nodded. It wasn't a satisfactory answer, but it wasn't bad either. Then I'll drop you off. You go that way. Click, click, click. Zeus looked at Satan, who had been hit by lightning and was staggering for a moment. If that lump had been stuck to him and prevented Eugene from moving freely until now, all he had to do was remove it. It wasn't that difficult. It probably won't take more than a few minutes. Foosh. Satan, his eyes gleaming fiercely, emitted dark attribute magic power. Rumble. Looking at him, Zeus gripped the spear in his hand again. Chapter 379. Whoosh. Satan's fingertips flew toward Zeus's neck. His wide-open wings cut down the trees. A single black line reflected in Zeus's pupils. Poof. In an instant, Satan's hand pierced Zeus's neck. At that moment, crackle, Zeus's body, pierced by Satan's hand, transformed into golden lightning. Crackle, crackle, kya, Zeus's body exploded, and Satan, caught in the lightning, screamed. At the same time, Zeus disappeared. Satan endured the pain and rolled his bloodshot eyes. As Satan lifted his head, you're quick to notice. Crackle, crackle, just 20 meters away in the sky. Riding a small cloud, Zeus could be seen holding a thunderbolt in his hand. Swish. His reaction was quick. Satan jumped up from his spot, enduring the lightning coursing through his body. The distance was close, so it wouldn't take long to approach. Satan believed in his body. He told himself that he could endure the lightning spear in Zeus's hand and approach him. Flash. Light burst from Satan's vision. Satan's wings moved as he focused and continued to look at the tip of the spear. Boom. The thunderbolt Zeus had thrown landed next to Satan. He had dodged it. The corners of Satan's mouth rose. He had dodged the spear, so now it was his turn. That's how it should have been. But at that moment, you dodged one well. Rumble, growl. As Satan jumped up, dozens of lights flashed in his eyes. He had clearly dodged one. There were still dozens of thunderbolts left. Then, try dodging the rest. Crackle. Zeus's fingertips slowly and leisurely dropped down. Satan's feet quickened. If he got hit by even one of those, he would fall down again and get hit by the next thunderbolt in line. Boom, whoosh. Satan's wings moved quickly. He moved desperately to dodge the thunderbolts falling from the sky. 1, 2, 3. When he had dodged over a dozen thunderbolts, one of them tore through Satan's wing. Crackle. His wing was pierced and he staggered for a moment, but Satan didn't care. Mobility and stamina, those two were his greatest weapons. And so, Satan dodged the thunderbolts pouring down from the sky and finally reached Zeus. Zeus. The last remaining thunderbolt passed before Satan's eyes. And as Satan's hand became a 5-pronged scythe and was about to cover Zeus. Did you think you could win just by approaching me? As if he had been waiting for that, Zeus raised his fist, which was filled with lightning, high into the air. You do not know your own shortcomings. Boom. Zeus's fist slammed down on Satan's head. As if a giant thunderbolt had fallen from the sky to punish the world. Satan was caught in the lightning and fell deep into the ground without even being able to scream. And so, standing in the sky above the clouds again. Try crawling back up. Zeus looked down at the pit where Satan had fallen. There, Satan, who had been hit by a fist and crashed to the ground, looked up at him with gleaming black eyes. Moo. The Black Forest goat let out a cry. The arm wrestling with Odin was put on hold for a moment. Clatter, clatter. Odin's legs began to be pushed back. The arm wrestling didn't last long. He had thought of pushing it back outside somehow, but he didn't have the strength. Gulp. Odin looked at his legs being pushed back little by little. He had exerted so much strength that blood had rushed to his head, and red nasal blood was flowing down Odin's beard along his nose. I guess I need to change my approach. Kwang. Odin, who dropped one hand, threw a punch with all his might. Kwang, Wang, the shape of the magic circle changed every moment. If until now his magic had mainly amplified his own strength while decreasing the strength of his opponent, it was time to change his approach. Bang, Kwang, punches that were endlessly repeated. His hands were bleeding so much that they were about to burst. Even though his bones ached, Odin did not stop punching. Mua, the black goat screamed. It felt different from the screams until now. Compared to before when it had been close to a threat, this scream was closer to a shriek. Does it hurt? Kwang, Odin's fist clenched even tighter. Even though his flesh had been torn off and his bones were exposed, Odin did not feel any pain. That was because one of the magics he had cast on his own fist included magic that prevented him from feeling pain. Then take some more. Kwang, Odin's punches continued again. A simple repetition of attacks. However, there was no better way against an opponent who had stopped to break through the cracks. Nevertheless, kikik, kiki, Odin's body continued to be pushed back. Now, more than half of his face had broken through the cracks. Can't I push it out? Odin gritted his teeth and raised his head. Before he knew it, the black goat was looking down at Odin. On the face of the giant goat-like creature, Odin felt like the creature was smiling. It was not a delusion. The black goat and Odin made eye contact. And at that moment, it had just disappeared. The cries of other young goats were heard from behind Odin. When had it started? Odin discovered countless goats gathering around him. The creatures drooled as if they had a delicious dinner in front of them. Quaduk, a goat bit Odin's shoulder. Normally, the teeth of a young goat would never have pierced Odin's body. As the best magician in the tower, Odin's body was always surrounded by several magics. However, now was not the time for that. All the magic Odin could use right now was focused on blocking the black goat that was breaking through the cracks. Quack, Quadude, Odin's body was buried in dozens of goats. The weight of the huge goat-like creatures pressed down on Odin's body. Their teeth gnawed at Odin's shoulders, arms, and legs. Goat teeth were embedded all over his body, and blood flowed out. He did not feel any pain, but instead, Odin was put at a crossroads. Should he give up blocking the black goat and deal with the goats, or should he force his way through? It was not an easy question. Neither destination of the two crossroads was bright. But then, Mongyal, a blue barrier formed around Odin's body. The barrier pushed away the goats that were attached to Odin's body and protected Odin from their teeth. Was it a skill that created armor? However, it felt strangely cool. Protection of the sea is imbued in your body. Protection of the sea. The moment he checked the name of the skill, Odin thought of one person. If it was a high ranker who used skills related to the sea, it would definitely be Poseidon. Are you so exhausted that you can't even tell people apart? Crack. The body of the goat surrounding Odin was split in half. The body of the goat, split in two. Yuan, who cut the goat with a flaming sword, appeared in front of Odin. You're still acting like a dog on your own. Was it you? It was a smoky reaction. It was a good thing to get rid of the goats. However, Yuan's appearance was not of much help to Odin. Someone else was needed to resolve this situation. What about Kronos? What happened to him? At Odin's question, Yuan realized that he was thinking the same thing as himself. Burning and cutting the goats rushing in, Yuan replied. About half of it is done. Halfway. The rest, he'll take care of it himself. No one but Yuan could persuade Kronos, who was both outside and inside the tower. It was something that only Yuan, an eyewitness who had returned to the past using the clockwork, could do. Of course, he didn't think he would change his mind in this short amount of time. He shouldn't push the decision, but he shouldn't coax and appease him either. He just had to leave him alone. Of course, there's no time. It was impossible to know how long it would take to make that decision. I know. Is there a way to push this guy out? Not right now. Fuwoosh. Flames erupted from Yuan's sword. Sacred fire burns the young goat of the Black Forest. Puck. To cut down the goats with strong regenerative powers, one needed a power greater than their own. After testing various skills, Yuan thought that fire was the best. Yuan continued to cut down the goats without rest. These goats were also guys who had fallen away from the Black Forest goat. Killing even one of them was a way to weaken the power of the Black Forest goat. So, what are you going to do? There's no way to push this guy out, but there's definitely a way to buy time right now. Buy time. A look that asked how you were going to do that. Yuan shrugged at Odin's gaze. You look like you don't believe me. I'm hurt. I guess you're confident since you're joking. Unlike Odin, who was on the verge of death trying to stop the Black Forest goat alone, Yu-won seemed to have some faith. Yu-won's gaze turned to the sky. In the midst of the goats pouring out, in his reddened eyes, a cloud came in. That guy may not know anything else, but he's good at fighting. Wuwan Jiamjung, resonates. Whoosh, right after the message rang out. Boo, in the distance, a huge stick flew in. Puck, the end of the stick pushed the Black Forest goat outside. Odin narrowed his eyes as he looked at the stick that had flown right over his head. This is a long stick that seemed to be connected to the sky. As far as he knew, there was only one item of this size in the tower. Ruyi Jingu Bang Ruyi Golden Hoop. An item that was originally used to measure the depth of the sea in the Dragon Palace, with destructive power beyond that of a weapon. It is also called Cheonhado Junction Sinjal, the sacred iron at the bottom of Tianhe, the weapon of the great sage. I'm here. A boisterous voice was heard from the end of the long and huge stick. A powerful and cheerful cry that did not suit this situation. But perhaps because of that, it was a voice that gave courage just by hearing it. The first insurance Yu-won was waiting for. The strongest ally who fought and won against numerous outer gods together. He came quickly. When did you call? Thinking about it inwardly, Yu-won muttered as he watched Sun Ogong's Jiamgo flying in on a somersault cloud. Monkey, the great sage, heaven's equal. It was the moment Sun Ogong appeared. Chapter 380. Sun Ogong began the trials with Zeus and Poseidon. The process of piercing through the ceiling of the tower and ascending to godhood was different for each individual. Among them, Sun Ogong's trial was known to be the most difficult and time-consuming among Yu-won's companions. So, they had thought that he would be late. Sun Ogong, I'm done. A few days ago, a message arrived at Yu-won's kit. There was no intention of disturbing Sun Ogong, who had finished his trial. Until then, Kronos hadn't killed the administrator, and there were no cracks in the wall. He needed time to adapt to his new powers. Especially Sun Ogong, who had acquired the Golden Crow. However, now was not the time. Before going down to the first floor, Yu-won sent a message to Sun Ogong. Yu-won, stop what you're doing and come down to the first floor now. You too, come down to the first floor as quickly as possible. At that time, he didn't know that he would be fighting the black goat of the forest like he was now. The timing is amazing, anyway. Calling Sun Ogong was quite a bit of insurance. Swish, Sun Ogong, who was flying through the sky on his somersault cloud, jumped down. Sun Ogong, who looked like a dot in the distance, quickly approached. As soon as he landed on the ground, boom, clatter. The ground caved in with the impact, causing a small vibration in the area. Yu-won frowned as he looked at Sun Ogong, who had landed on the ground. Do you always have to come in so noisily? Didn't you tell me to come quickly? You learned the art of shrinking the ground when you were in India, didn't you? Oh, that's right. What do you mean, that's right? Sun Ogong scratched his head and turned his head. The black goat of the forest, pushed by the Ruyi Bang. Sun Ogong asked, looking at it. Anyway, how did this happen? It's not his turn to come out yet. I don't know. You don't know. Originally, only the young goats were supposed to come in. Me, Yu-won replied, looking around at the goats. Somehow it turned out like this. The surrounding goats were wary of Sun Ogong's appearance. They, too, had instinctively realized it. What kind of being had just appeared before them? Even so, moo, Shub-Niggurath was a formidable opponent even for Sun Ogong. Crack, thud, Sun Ogong, who had regained his Ruyi Jingu Bang, muttered as he looked at her face. Suddenly Shub-Niggurath, the name Sun Ogong had muttered rang clearly in Yu-won's ears. He didn't know if it was because both of them knew the name, or because Shub-Niggurath was halfway into the tower. Odin didn't seem to have heard the name properly. Me, as if asking how he dared to speak her name, Shub-Niggurath cried out as she looked at Sun Ogong. Shub-Niggurath, known as the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, the goat with 1,000 young, and the black ram, she was a being of madness. In terms of power as an outer god, Shub-Niggurath was superior to the foolish incarnation of chaos. You know too, right? I can't beat that one right now. Thud, thud, Sun Ogong pointed to the copper headband wrapped around his head. If this was all undone, it might be different. Jiamgo. A seal that restrained Sun Ogong's power after he reached India and passed the trials. Each time the seal was released, Sun Ogong would reach a higher level. However, don't bluff, you wouldn't have been able to beat her even if all of this was undone. But it wasn't all undone at that time. I've heard that 100 times. Sun Ogong, who who was fighting with his neck veins bulging, and Yuan, who reacted coolly to Sun Ogong's words, were like cats and dogs. Odin wondered what was going on. Sun Ogong, who had been asserting his pride for a moment, soon pursed his lips and asked grumblingly. Anyway, do I just have to push her away? For now, think about buying time. Time. Kronos is over there. Kronos. Didn't that old man disappear? Why is he there? Never mind, there's no time to explain, so just do something about her first. It was difficult to expect Sun Ogong to understand anything. Sun Ogong, who had been scratching his head for a while, not knowing what was going on, soon looked up at Shub-Niggurath. Buying time, now that he had passed the trial and obtained Geomgo. Even for Sun Ogong, Shub-Niggurath was a tough opponent. However, she hadn't yet managed to pass through the unstably collapsed wall and was still awkwardly stuck in the crack. Sun Ogong's eyes narrowed. His eyes blazed fiercely. Like Wu Wan, he had also recalled his fight with Shub-Niggurath. It'll be enough to blow off some steam. Poof, pop, pop, pop. Thick smoke billowed around Sun Ogong. And by the time the smoke had cleared. Doppelganger technique. Hundreds, thousands of Sun Ogongs appeared. Doppelganger technique. One of Sun Ogong's signature skills along with the fire-eyed gold jang. If there was one difference, it was that the number was much larger than the world knew. There's no business in front of a real con man. There's no business in front of a real con man. There's no business in front of a real con. There's no business. The Sun Ogongs all struck the same pose as if they had made a pact. At the same time, thousands of Ruyi bangs were aimed at Shub-Niggurath, who was tearing through the crack and coming inside. Get bigger, get bigger, get bigger, Wang. The tips of the poles shook violently. Speaking for the thousands of doppelgangers, the real Sun Ogong opened his mouth. Ruyi, thud, 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 thud. Goo. Thousands of Ruyi bangs struck Shub-Niggurath's body. Even a small, scattered body was no different than a small sheep in front of the Ruyi bangs, which could measure the depth of the sea. Heyo. Odin let out a hollow laugh at the thousands of Ruyi bangs stretched out toward Shub-Niggurath. The Ruyi bangs that flew by him, precisely avoiding where he was, each contained a threatening power. To think that all those doppelgangers possessed the power of a high ranker. He couldn't believe it even though he was seeing it with his own eyes. I've heard a lot about it, but the great sage, heaven's equal. A high ranker who killed the Jade Emperor and turned the heavens upside down. The so-called rebel of the heavens, who had recently become a single-digit high ranker. He was someone he had been keeping an eye on. More than anything, he was a being who had returned to the past with Wu Wan. But even so, that didn't matter. To think that he would change so drastically in such a short time. Well, well, well. Shub-Niggurath's cries intensified. It was more than just a cry, it was a sound that shook the minds of Odin and Yu-Wan nearby, as well as Sun Wukong's clones. Odin's body nearby faltered, and blood began to flow from Yuan's nose and ears. Pop, pop, pop. One by one, Sun Wukong's clones were unable to withstand Shub-Niggurath's cries and began to disappear. Crack, crackle, crackle. The end of the Ruyi Jingu bang that Sun Wukong had sharpened with his palm trembled. Light gradually emanated from the long headband wrapped around his head. Ah, screech. Sun Wukong frowned at the light from the headband. Sun Wukong, who had been holding the Ruyi Jingu bang with both hands, took one hand off and covered his head as if in pain. An extreme headache plagued Sun Wukong. The more intense the headache became, the stronger Sun Wukong's power grew. Clatter, clatter. Little by little, Shub-Niggurath began to be pushed back. Of course, that meant Sun Wukong felt like he was dying even more. This bastard, why is it doing something like this? No matter how much he thought about it, it was strange. No matter how much the administrator had disappeared and the wall had weakened, the more force was applied to the crack, the more points would be wasted. It was even more so if the subject was Shub-Niggurath. It must be drawn to something. Drawn to what? What do you think? Yuan's gaze turned to Shub-Niggurath's eyes. A gaze fixed on one place. Yuan and Sun Wukong's eyes followed Shub-Niggurath's gaze. And there, wow, Dan-Ah was standing there with a blank expression on her face. Because of that girl, there's no other explanation. Why? Because the foolish confusion is also interested in Dan-Ah. It was just a short while ago. The foolish confusion, who had opened the crack and drawn the power from outside the tower inside, had decided to stop fighting after judging that it could no longer use points. However, the foolish confusion, who had been like that, reacted differently after seeing Dan-Ah. He was the one who hated it more than anything when his plans went awry. That guy, thud. Shub-Niggurath began to struggle. Clatter, clatter, clatter. Yui shook. Several clones had already lost their form to Shub-Niggurath's cries. Oh, yeah, you're planning to go all the way, aren't you? Creak. Sun Ogong's lips curled up. Weeing. The light of the Geomgongo became stronger. Sun Ogong endured the throbbing in his head as if it was about to burst and continued his power struggle with Shub-Niggurath. Just then, hey, but we can't keep blocking her like this. Sun Ogong's brows narrowed as he looked back at Wu Yian. What are you doing? His eyes seemed out of focus. It wasn't that he was dazed in this chaotic situation, but Wu Yian's reaction seemed strange. Hey, get a hold of yourself. It was the same even though he shouted loud enough to make his ears ring. Wu Yian, and Dan Ah too. Both of their eyes were out of focus and their minds seemed to have flown far away. Oh, crap, right now, there was no one he could trust. It seemed difficult to stop Shub-Niggurath from coming inside right now. There's no other way. For now, there was no way to stop Shub-Niggurath from coming inside. Instead, she must have used a lot of her strength to force her way into the tower. Moreover, it would be difficult for her to exert great strength right after breaking through the cracks. It might be better to finish it now. Shub-Niggurath. She was someone he had never been able to catch before the regression. Shub-Niggurath was one of the few outer gods who ranked higher than the foolish chaos, and he had to face her someday, if not now. Yeah, I'll finish you off too. Weeing, just as the color of the Geomgongo gradually changed to gold. Click, Sun Ogong heard a small ticking sound in his ear. It was a sound he definitely had heard somewhere. Juk, JJEOK. The cracks in the wall that had been stretched by Shub-Niggurath gradually decreased. It was easy to break a glass plate, but difficult to put it back together. However, Sun Ogong knew of one person who could do it. Kronos is over there. Sun Ogong curled his lips as he recalled what Wu Yian had said. What the hell? Click, time rewind, begins. Is that what it was? If Wu Yian had heard, she would have looked at him pitifully and said, do you get it now?